Welcome. So, Myko is a genealogist, spokesperson, and director of content for MyHeritage, one of the world's leading genealogical websites, regularly seen on television, radio, online, and in print. He is the, quote, historian of all things quirky for CBC, royal expert for Fox News, the BBC, NBC, ABC, and Sky News, among many others. He holds a master's degree in genealogy with distinction and is a qualified adult education teacher with worldwide lecturing experience from Oxford University to the National Archives, National Library of Wales, and many other locations across the UK, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Denmark. Welcome, Myko. So excited for you to come and just be talk about all the stuff that you love to do every day, which is great.
Yeah, I tried to avoid talking about genealogy too much because I didn't want to bore people. But this is more of a travelogue. I don't know what this is. This is a collection of tangents that have been come together to hopefully interest.
I was going to say,
possibly annoy everyone.
Isn't most research just a whole list of tangents that, or most research is like you go on one tangent and then you're like, I should learn more about that, and then it becomes your research. Like, I think tangents are very much integrated with with historians.
I think I'm a human tangent. I think wrapped up in a waistcoat. It's exciting. It's cool. I'm coming to you from a small tartan coated little Scottish corner of the world, and I've done all this public speaking and things like that, but this is new and this is cool. I've never done anything like this on Twitch, and I'm excited. There's all these history geeks and stuff.
I know. And it's always great to have. That's like why it took me maybe like a year to do this, because I really just like started meeting all these amazing people from here on Twitch, like with TKF, the Knowledge Foundation, our fellowship. I always mess that one up. And then like everyone over on TikTok. And so I was just like, well, you know what? Like, if anybody wants to like practice some new research and they want to send it out to the public, because I'm much more about disseminating research to public. And like, one of the things I've always noticed is like at like larger conferences, one of the big conferences I go to is American Research Center in Egypt, which is a very interesting mixture of probably like 20% actual archaeologists, Egyptologists, historians, and then the rest of it is just old Americans who really like ancient Egypt and archaeology. And like, that's perfectly fine and acceptable, and they have in certain ways integrated themselves into kind of the world of academia. But what you would notice is that whenever they would print out all the different lectures are going to come out, you wouldn't see one or two of those people at certain lectures, because sometimes the academics are given a really, really boring title or a boring like description, and it's just the academics who are in there, which is totally fine. Like, there are some things, that probably the public are not as interested in, but like, really, if you just change the title, most of the time you're gonna, like, if you don't make it as academic. And so it's kind of one of those things that I've noticed is like, you got to cater to the audience, and I try to cater to as wide as I possibly can, because it's so hard.
Well, I promise a minimum of puns. I'm going to try and keep it down as much as possible.
We will absolutely take it.
Really going to do my best. We mentioned, I think, was it last week or this week, that I said that my presentations they're medium presentations.
Medium.
Because they're not rare and they're really not very well done.
They're not rare. It's genuinely probably one of the best puns I've ever heard in my life. It is genuinely like so good. I love that.
This is going to get worse. This is,
just get ready, everyone.
Watch,
you're
you're going to see an effeminate man with a British accent taking on a journey across Europe in fast time. It's like the lowest budget episode of Doctor Who you've ever seen, and we're going to enjoy it, I hope.
Amazing. Alrighty, let me pull up the PowerPoint. Okay. It's too large to preview, which is not a great sign, but a great sign in other ways. I'm downloading.
I've never been called that before.
Oh god. It also could be my... No, it's not my computer. Actually, you know what it is? It's probably my drive and why it's so wrong. Let's just hope
didn't I? I broke things.
No, that's okay. Let's just hope that you didn't put any fun fonts that are going to look really crappy now.
Why would I do that? It's wingdings all the way. That's how we work.
Okay. Okay. That's good. All right, it's working. No, because I've done that before where I'm like, I once found and downloaded the Harry Potter font to include it in a PowerPoint, and then I realized I had to make it into a PDF because if I moved it to a different computer that did not have that font, it would look really bad. So I had to make it into a PDF, and then it looked weird when I presented it. But I was like, this is it. I want you to see this. It has to have this font. And I promise it was for a relevant reason. How do I do this? How do I start the... What the heck kind of message was that?
Maybe we just have to talk our way through it, and I'll say, well...
No, here we go.
Look outside. Graves exist. Any questions? No?
No. I mean, I think that would be sufficient for sure. Okay, why are you doing this to me? Oh, here we go. I remember. I know how to work my own computer, right? I know how to... There we go. Hide the presenter view. And then I gotta do this. And then I gotta do this.
Whoa, I see it.
No, I know. And then... But I gotta do that. Window. Oh my god. Too many different things. Share. Oh no. I shared the wrong one. Ah! You know, I've done this before.
Oh, people are seeing secrets.
See, they are seeing secrets. That I preemptively did that too early. So people are seeing secrets. This is my worst thing, is that when I share my desktop is very well organized of all the different games that I play, but everyone hates it. So it's very... I apologize to people, but that's just how my life works. Okay. So now you should be able to see it.
Oh, I can. Oh, this is technology. I like it.
This is technology.
Oh,
this is technology. But then I also have to change this so that people can see your physical face, and not that you're not a ghost. There we go.
Oh,
okay.
Oh.
Now everyone can
down.
see you. All right. I know. Okay. This is the only way that I know how to do it, even though it's like genuinely stupid and crazy.
That's fine.
And then
there we are. Hello, everyone. I guess I'll say next slide when it's time to move on to the next one, and we'll work that way. If that's
absolutely.
All right. So, yeah, I want to say thank you for starting a little bit earlier for me. I'm a bit of a night owl anyway, so we'll see how long we can go, but I'll try and drag this out until it gets painful. And if we keep going for long enough, then maybe the people who come at the normal time might see us at slide 2 or 3 or something like that. And we'll see what we get on with. But let's go straight to the next slide. I promise you, it doesn't get better than this. Here's me lounging around at home, telling filthy stories to woodland creatures. But when I'm not leading animals astray, I can be found all over the internet. We've seen on TV, radio, doing all kinds of things. Australia, the UK, Canada, USA, New Zealand, Denmark, even Iran once, which was new, and I'm not sure will ever happen again. It's a very long story. I do this as part of my day job. I'm kind of lucky to work for a big family history website, looking at records, going to archives, and spending all my time in libraries and things like that. But I'm just exceedingly geeky when it comes to learning this kind of stuff. And if you have questions, say them in the chat. I can see it, and we can chat away. I might not know the answer, but
I did forget. Don't forget, everyone, if you want to put your question, use the lecture questions channel point so that I don't lose it in the sauce in all the rest of the chats. So that'll help. But you can do it whenever. Just please use the lecture questions chat. Quick channel point.
Keep an eye on it. We'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can probably recommend where you can find the answer if I don't know it. So that's quite cool. And it's just really fun to talk about the past. And that's why I'm here, and why you've seen me chatting away a lot of these other lectures in this stream and other streams that Melissa's been putting on. I sometimes stream myself. You can see on my name there. Not that often, but still, maybe I'll get better at that. Maybe we'll see. But it's also my Twitter name, Dapper Historian, for one reason or another. And that's for another time. I'm here now showing you pictures of badges. Next slide. speaking of inflicting photographs on unsuspecting strangers, before we set foot inside these cemeteries of Britain and Europe, I want to be as inclusive as I possibly can. So I'm going to give you all a chance to enjoy this, and I appreciate not everyone is into skeletons and human remains and things, and there's going to be some as we go. The presentation will have a handful, and we need them to explain the subject. But they're not going to be overwhelming, and it would be pretty impolite of me not to give you this warning. But I've devised this kind of really cool method. If you are a bit sensitive, there's no need to leave or anything like that. I'm going to put a little marker on each slide just before things happen in the top right corner of the presentation, like this. So if you go 1, 2, 3, next slide.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see it.
There we go. So you see it. When you see that marker, I'm giving you some advance notice that the next slide or succession of slides is going to contain human remains, and we're not going to spring it on you either. If you see that red spot when I move to the next slide, just before I do, I'll tell you, and just to let you know to close your eyes for a moment. You can sit back, listen. I'll be as descriptive as I can so you don't miss out, and when things are over, things have been put away, I'll say done, and that's your cue to open your eyes again. You can carry on as if nothing has happened, and hopefully we're okay with that, and no one who is a little bit alarmed by that kind of stuff needs to lose too much sleep. The whole topic is a bit of a grave subject, but I promise you, when we dig in, it's not all doom and gloom. What's that? 3 already?
The first one.
So,
we got it.
Next slide, please, if you can.
Yes, I'm just editing some things. Let's go.
Here we go. There will be skeletons, Probakis, definitely. So now, the big question. I think let's begin with a little experiment and get to know each other a bit. Has anyone in the chat, you can tell me, have you ever visited a cemetery? A big, really simple one to start with. It might be me as a bit of a reformed goth, but I can't get enough of them. But anyone else?
Yes.
There we go.
I was going to say, the best question, have you visited a cemetery when you weren't visiting someone in particular?
Well, listen, we're getting there. We're going to. You're thinking ahead.
I'm thinking ahead.
So,
gotcha.
You're thinking in the same vein. So, the next question, I've seen some yeses. Have you ever visited a cemetery for research or for fun?
Mm-hmm.
I was a visitor.
Technically say, I don't. Oh no, there are a couple. There are a couple that I have, but not distinctly
visiting.
To. No, actually, no. That's a lie. I have done. I wouldn't say for fun, but like as a tour, tourist falls into fun. Yes, research is
tourism.
Fun.
Yeah,
that is true.
So now the third question. It looks like I'm in the room with a lot of people that are quite like me, but I just want to go the third one and just see. This might separate you a little bit. Have you ever visited a cemetery while on holiday?
Yes, I have. Not a lot, I'll say.
We're going upwards in levels of geekiness.
Yeah. I love it. Wow. A lot of yeses. I'm loving it.
See some yeses. See. Look at that. Lots of yeses. And this is the thing. I think it shows something very important. Cemeteries are important, not just for those people who are related to people who are inside, but for all of us, for all kinds of different reasons. And I promise I won't ask too much of you all the way through the rest of this presentation, but if we can take a look at some of those reasons together, it might help us understand them more. So if you go to the next slide, please.
Mm-hmm. Wow, what a beautiful statue. Oh my goodness.
Yes, so a lot of these are my own photos that I've pulled from various different travels. When I go to these archives, I will sometimes disappear and see a cemetery and learn about it. So a lot of these are my own pictures. So yes, that's in Vienna, which we'll get to at some point soon. But there's a great quote by a Swiss writer, Friedrich Dürrenmatt, who says why this is worth exploring in detail. And he says, dealing with death is the root of culture. And I think that's really big. I think cemeteries and burial grounds are a focal point of all of this culture. It's a window into history, family history, local history. It's a gateway into customs and culture. They tell stories. It's like a collective biography. I love that term for summing all of this up, because we can look at any individual and we can learn everything about that one person in the cemetery. But the moment we take a step back and look at this in a collective way, we get this broader picture and we see how this individual fits into the community and that story of all the people around them. And those similarities and differences can tell you a lot more. And that's something that sometimes we overlook, and they bring people together. I suppose that's to be expected, though, with the cemetery, if they're the dead center of any community. Next slide, please. And if we move the pun counter up one.
Pun one.
I know. You people get what you deserve. So all of these cemeteries differ from country to country, region to region, and even in lots of cases from town to town, with more unique examples than we could count, that also show off all of these unique little quirks and eccentricities. Every one of them tells this unique story. Next slide, please. We can boil those differences down to 4 core elements, and these are the things that make a cemetery unique. They tend to be different mixtures of these 4 core elements. So first, it's faith, the sense in whichever religion that's involved in that cemetery, the amount of influence that religion has, or the lack of influence that religion has, the contribution of that religion to the design or to the use of the cemetery. There's culture, which is the sense of the broad ethnic, national, local traits that define the area that the cemetery is in, and all the fashions of the period. They certainly change things a lot. Then there's practicality, space, geography, soil type, population growth, the normal questions that you would ask if you were to put anything down, from a new house to a town hall to a cemetery. You might know in New Orleans, there's tombs are often placed above ground because of all the flooding and all the things like that. These are the kind of practical considerations we look at. And then finally, there's perception. And those are the feelings around cemeteries and death. Those are the things that come together around that. You'll see a range here from cultures that believe that bodies are sacred, cemeteries are going to be revered for all time, areas where concern is put more towards the soul, and those ideas that when you're gone, the body is just a shell and there's nothing really left of that person anymore. So they have much less attachment to human remains. Next slide, please. So these concepts are incredibly broad, but it's going to be much easier to get our heads around this if we look at the real world. So let's look at some real world examples and get a feel for all those similarities and differences that run across all of these different cultures. So I hope your bags are packed. We are definitely officially on our way. Let's start with the next slide. We're going to start with a few concepts to be aware of that we'll take as we move through, to bear in mind as these things progress. And we're going to start with symbolism. As you look at old stones and carvings, be aware that absolutely everything matters. These are your final resting places and the final chance for people to leave their mark on the world. Every single use of space matters. The materials that the stones are made from can have meaning, but sometimes it can be down to the supply of certain stones that make it more of a practical consideration. So this can feed into things as well. In the north of Britain, for example, Scotland, Northern England, they use sandstone a lot because that was more plentiful. It was easy to carve, so they really went for it. More towards the south of Britain, they use marble and granite. It costs a lot more to carve, and that says something in itself. If you still see carvings there, it costs a lot of money to carve these things, so grander memorials mean a lot more. Look at the fact not just that a stone is large, shows that that person was wealthy, but choices of carvings as well. A hand pointing upwards symbolizes that someone's going to heaven. A hand pointing downwards doesn't mean the opposite. It means that the person died suddenly. Anchors sometimes relate to seafarers and those people who were in the Navy or anything like that, but they also were used as symbols of hope and anchoring influences of Jesus and the apostles. Celtic crosses represent eternity. Flying hourglasses mean the swift passage of time, and you'll often find things upside down, and that inversion is symbolic. A lit torch, for example, symbolizes life, and an inverted one, with the flame still burning, means life after death. Everything has a meaning. And you'll see heraldry as well. You'll see things that can be used when a stone has worn too much to read a name. If you use an armorial, which is a book of different lists of coats of arms, you could still find the family burial name there. You'd see names, deaths, lifespans as well. You can just read that and find the name without even being able to read the stone. But again, the more you see, the more it costs to produce. You'll see the tools of the trade, like this image we're looking at here from Edinburgh, from Greyfriars Cemetery. Here we see syringes and knives. This person was a surgeon in his lifetime. There are religious elements that give you an idea about someone's faith. You'll see memento mori as well, a reminder that death comes to us all and we should live our life well while we have the chance. These designs are monumental, and you could say they really left their mark on history. Another 2 puns there. The timer counting going up. And I see the comment there by Paranoid that the evolution of a cemetery is an influence. And these 4 elements aren't static. they can change over time, and they often do. So sometimes you will see, if you have a large cemetery or cemetery that's in use for centuries, things will change. So it's not set in stone. Add another one to the pun marker.
Wow.
But I know.
So good. It's just so you're on it, man. I just can't do that. It's just insane.
Good is a relative term, but it so is. But yes, so yes, it's definitely something to think about, that evolution, and it is something to note. And it might also give you an idea, if you can look at some of these symbols or some of these different patterns, some of these different styles, some of these different things that are done in a cemetery, as to when a stone may have been placed or something like that, which can also help you if you can't read it or if you want to learn more. If you can go to the next slide. While we're here, or we talk about stones, I've got something else that a number of people have asked questions about, and some people have seen. Did you hear you scoffing from Ireland? Well, probably. I can hear people scoffing from downstairs and upstairs, hearing me shouting about this. But yes, this confused some people, and you might have come across this, you might not. And the person that showed me this in particular, it's a list of a whole family. This is an Irish gravestone, if I remember rightly. And one of the children that is born to this family has been removed. And they were quite alarmed. They thought there was some kind of scandal. And I sat down with an expert in cemeteries and asked about this. And they run all the cemeteries in the Church of England. So a massive person who knew lots of things. And he explained this. And when you know what the answer is, it all becomes very, very simple. Stones are really, really expensive, and people are only human. And so if you see a stonemason doing all this carving, it takes them ages. And if they make a mistake, to replace the stone is incredibly massive, and it's going to cost them, basically, it's going to mean it's not worth doing. So what they do is they chisel out the area they've got wrong, and they make a nice, neat replacement, and they stick it in there, and they use lime mortar to seal it up. And it looks fine. Everyone's happy. You can barely tell. But then over time, lime mortar wears away faster than everything else. So over the decades, this little correction will fall out. And you might find it somewhere nearby. Maybe it's on the ground. Maybe it's been lost to time. But it's not a conspiracy. It's not a scandal. It's just incompetence, which is a bit more old-fashioned and a bit more kind of historic. But
I was going to say,
it's one of those things to know.
This is literally the helicopter and the spaceship at the Temple of Seti I in Abydos, and everyone thinks that they carved a giant helicopter and a flying car, and it's quite literally that Seti the First is, so it's Seti the First made it, and he carved one thing, and then Ramses the Great's son came in, plastered it, and then recarved something else, and all the plaster bits fell off. So that's really cool. I had no idea that they would do this with like tombstones, because then you're right, like the stones are stupid expensive. You would never want to. That sucks.
It would be rubbish if you just finish the Great Pyramid and you make a mistake at the end and have to throw it all away and start again.
So, wouldn't be very economical to the whole of the nation. So
I think if we could sum up probably every presentation I've ever done on every bit of history in 3 words, is really people are idiots. And that comes in different ways, but this is how all of history kind of arranges itself.
Yeah, man. So typos get you. It's not
they do. Can we move on to the next slide?
Absolutely. It's very interesting.
So I can't repeat it enough when we talk about everything in the cemetery matters. Look at everything. Record it all. All of it has meaning. It's symbolic. It's practical. Graves were positioned with great care. Sometimes not in the way that you'd expect. In 1700 Scotland, for example, stones were always positioned, laid east to west. This also happened in Ireland, I think, as well, at the same time. The description would face east towards the Holy Land. Victorians, in their quest to make cemeteries a bit more useful, which we'll learn more about later, would often remove stones and make gardens, which is incredibly frustrating. They lay them around the edge of a cemetery, or they rearrange them, because at the time, in the Middle Ages, you would just find an empty space and stick your hole in the ground and you would get going. But they rearranged them, they made them neat, nice, lines that you could walk through on a Sunday to pay your respects, but they didn't move the bodies. They left the bodies where they are. So you might be paying respects in front of who you believe to be an ancestor or a relative or someone famous, and actually that person's buried 30 feet to the left or right because of the fact they've moved things. And that's something to be aware of, especially. And you can usually tell if these stones have been moved by just how neat they are. If they're from an earlier time, they often weren't like that at all. If we can move to the next slide. So from the medieval period onward, we start to see a great number of tomb carvings. These are lifelike representations of people, particularly amongst the wealthy, particularly in Britain, Western Europe, and they come with their own kinds of symbolism as well. People could be dressed in official robes of their occupation. They could be in military gear. They had incredible amounts of symbolism again. Sometimes they'd be put alongside other memento mori, skulls, statues of decaying bodies to remind people of their own mortality. And as we move later through history to the Renaissance, lying figures became less popular. You see those in the kind of 1500s, 1600s. Often they're praying. Sometimes if they had a sword, it would mean that they'd fought in some kind of war, battle, or crusade. But we see figures kneeling or sitting, sometimes praying, so they're praying for eternity. And this had a really incredible way to see those who lived in an era before photography. Death masks were a lot more common in that era, and they were sometimes used to make these effigies. And we can see these many centuries before photography was created. If we can move to the next slide. Yeah, feng shui. Feng shui is important, I think, in terms of cemeteries and everything else. I think that's one way to look at it. A very kind of old dead person feng shui. Is it common that special people and commoners were put to rest in separated places, and why? Sort of, and I think we're going to cover that here when we talk about consecrated ground. So in the early days of the church, burial was controlled exclusively by the church. And if you wanted to be buried in land blessed by the church, you had to be in their good graces. So the people who were spending their money, hiring the pews at the front of the church or anything like that, were always going to get the best spot in the cemetery. The people who perhaps weren't keeping up with their money, the people who were perhaps maybe not in good graces of the church, maybe they were of a different faith, maybe even sometimes they'd committed some kind of act or something like that, or they committed suicide when they died, or they had a certain illness, they could be declined for being buried in consecrated ground. And finding a burial in this period outside consecrated ground can be a big signal that there are questions that you have to ask, and you can maybe find out why. Unbaptized babies weren't allowed to be buried in consecrated ground, and sometimes when you've got a family member that's buried outside, and I think a lot of people think that the church is this all-encompassing organization in this period that everyone obeyed without question, but people are just like they are today with different clothes. And if your baby child was buried outside of the churchyard, and you would probably be more interested in being buried alongside them than being buried in the churchyard. So sometimes you'll find these little extra tombs elsewhere and different things as well. So that can be one of the reasons why people were separated, and this is a big thing. But there are ways around it we'll cover as well. This image we see here is a sailor. His name was John McLean, and he was buried in secret in 1854. He died of what they thought was cholera, and the church refused to bury him in the churchyard because of the fact they thought the cholera might spread. So his comrades of the ship buried him by the side of the road on the Isle of Arran, really quite far from home. I think he was from Northern Ireland, and he's still there today. You can see him, the sailor's grave. And there are other ways as well around this too that show how much people care. So if you go to the next slide.
Next slide. There we go.
That nature of consecration brings with it a lot of issues in an era of many faiths. I hear the art.
I was wondering if we were going to talk about this.
Yes, it's coming.
It's a very
we
iconic
live in a world...
meme. I don't like it. It's not a meme exactly, but like I think it is kind of a meme. People talk about this feast a lot.
Yeah, it's important. I think it's good. Love can cross the boundaries of faith, and it causes serious issues. When people believe that burial is for eternity in those kind of cultures, that's what matters most. And so until the government took the reins, and we talk about that in a little while, burial was something that was only controlled by the church. There were a few there weren't many solutions, but there were solutions, and people did find them. So this picture in particular is from the Netherlands. It's a Protestant and a Catholic couple, and they were forbidden to be buried together. So what they did is they had matching graves made on either side of a wall between the consecrated and unconsecrated parts of the same burial ground. And then they put this set of hands across between the two graves over the wall, so that even though they're divided by the wall, and that's down to silly rule makers, they're holding hands and they're together forever, at least in some form. So they are kind of buried together, even though the rules didn't let them.
Yeah.
I see the question there. For the people buried elsewhere, were their tombs engraved so loved ones could visit and know where they're buried? It kind of depends. Some of these burials were really, I hate to use the word slapdash, but if it was something very hasty and something like that, then often you would have a wooden memorial rather than a stone one. Maybe people would go back and add a stone one later, but often it was just wooden. So there's a huge amount of burials in cemeteries and places around the world that the people are still there, but we'll never know who they were or what they were doing, because the wooden memorial has long since gone and there's just nothing left to tell the story. So it's
and this is
an interesting one.
Absolutely the same thing in ancient Egypt. Like it's different to think about it, but a tomb, and often if and it depends on the time period, but a tomb is a gravestone. Like it is, like it, because it has information in there that tells you about the person. It tells you, sometimes they don't really go by dates and stuff, but like it's the same exact thing. But you had to be wealthy enough to be able to make a tomb, because I mean, these stones are expensive for the people of these time periods, but to build an entire tomb, you had to been using it for years. So like it really is. There probably, again, there's just all over the world, there are so many places where people are buried and you just really never know. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. This might be an Americanism of something. I was always told when I was a child that whenever I drove by a graveyard, I had to hold my breath so that ghosts did not follow me home. And
it's new
okay, it's a new one. Okay, so, Americans in the chat, please tell me if this is just something that my brother told me to scare me, or if this is something that other things. But as this proves that I was like a wild child, because I remember thinking, like, but what about the people who aren't buried in cemeteries? Does that mean I have to hold my breath everywhere I go? And it's like looking back, it's 100% true. Like, that's just like, you really never know where people are buried, because they're like, I always used to picture Native Americans. Like, I don't know where the Native Americans who are buried around here, because they probably didn't use tombstones and stuff, but it could be anyone who's not wealthy enough to be able to be on consecrated ground or even have any sort of stone. Okay, I'm very glad that I'm not the only one.
that will come up again soon. I think we're thinking in the same path. It shows I'm carving a fine avenue. I see the question about soldiers that died abroad and honorary graves. It depends. Different cultures have different things. I know in America there's a lot of focus on bringing soldiers home. There aren't that many soldiers buried outside of the United States. They tend to bring the coffins back. In Britain and in the places of European fighting, quite often they're buried where they fell, with the exception of very notable generals and high-ranking officers who are quite often put into barrels filled with brandy and taken home.
Whoa!
I mean, it's one way to get there.
That's one way.
The way I'm going to go. Yeah, and then they were buried. But if you weren't an officer, a colonel, a general, or something like that, you were usually just buried where you were. And early battles and wars and things, it was mostly mass graves. It was only later in things like the First World War that we started to give people individual graves. And you'll see in Belgium and the Netherlands and places like that, the military cemeteries there that are much more organised. And the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, I think there's the Veterans Administration, all these things really only started to come about in the 20th century. So it's all fairly new. Before then, it wasn't really thought of so much.
And so Mark in chat mentioned the DPAA, the Defense POW Accounting Agency, is a organization that it's actually one of the largest organizations that hires archaeologists in America, and I believe they're headquartered in Hawaii, if I remember correctly.
Wow.
And they pretty much have this, it's a task force where they go and find U.S. military troops who have died abroad, usually in, like, we're talking World War I, World War II, Vietnam, or Korea, not as recent, because most of the times that's a little bit easier, and they recover remains and bring them back, and it's a very, very interesting project. One of my old professors, really, she's a bioarchaeologist and now a forensic anthropologist, she really wanted to get hired by them for a while, because it's a very interesting project.
Well, a lot of people, I see the questions about burial, where you died on the field and things like that, and a lot of these people often were reburied. So they were given a sort of temporary burial at the time, and then after the war had ended, they went back to these very rudimentary cemeteries and then gave people a proper burial and dug people up en masse, recording who they were, and then putting them into the large, neat cemeteries that you see today. And I note there's a question about to call deceased people who rang church bells dead ringers, and I'm upset that I didn't think of the pun myself, but it brings me to another point that I was thinking of and I'd forgotten, but it's really important that we talk about rich people and poor people and stuff, and when I look at Scottish church records and things, you had to pay for a burial, and in a lot of parts of Scotland, people were so poor they couldn't afford a burial, so you won't find them in records of burials, and their memorial won't be there because it's probably made of wood. So there are records of the church accounts, and they had two things that they would do. And the first, if you had a bit of money but not enough for a burial, is you would hire something called a morgue cloth, which is like a bit of fabric that went over a coffin or even just over the body, while you had a little bit of a ceremony, and then you put them in the ground.
Got it.
And the hiring of that morgue cloth, it has their name noted by it, so you can find them that way. And if you couldn't even afford that, then you would pay for the church bell to be rung in memory of your relative or something like that. And that's nice. The only note that these people ever died, because they just didn't have the money, and the church wasn't willing to do this for free, quite kind of cruelly. And so that's where we find their names, and there are huge parts of the world that have a lot of people that just didn't have the money that the church wanted to do that. So this is not a rare thing. That happens quite a lot.
Absolutely.
So
there's a question about U.S. soldiers in Normandy, and I believe that they are, but I'm now wondering if maybe even if they are there might be a tombstone, but the body has been moved. I'm wondering.
Some were. It's definitely the policy to bring them home, but it's not always possible.
Yeah.
So there are plenty that are buried in Vietnam, for example.
Quite a few, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just because they couldn't be taken back for whatever reason. And so they've decided to leave them there. So there are American cemeteries, they're just not that many. And it's really interesting if you go to somewhere where there are cemeteries for both sides. You can see two sides of a conflict. I remember as a school kid going to Belgium and France and seeing these burials and things of British soldiers, American soldiers, things like that. But then I went to a German cemetery, and they don't have graves that stick up. They just have almost like paving slabs on the ground with all the names on. So it's a really different experience. It's just a big flat field with all of these paving slabs just full of names, and it's a much more somber place. It's really interesting to see the difference of how these different people treat their dead, and their military dead especially, because different countries, again, different cultures place different significance on military service, and that's a big thing. I think the United States is big on that, and that's why you have the National Military Cemetery in Arlington and all the other stuff.
I was going to say,
bringing them home is that's kind of part of the deal, I think.
I had a lot of experience now. I live quite close to Arlington National Cemetery, and it is now where all four of my grandparents are buried. And so I've had two. I wasn't able to go to one of the funerals, but I've had, and actually we're waiting on. That's the other thing. It's a 6-month process to get in, even though my grandfather is already there. My grandmother has not been officially buried there, and so it's a very interesting process, because the thing that everybody sees of Arlington National Cemetery, the main pictures, those are for only the elite people, and they are not buried there. Everyone has to pretty much be, well, no, actually no, because so the small stones, they are fastly running out of room, And so that is why in certain areas they've created crematoriums. And so since both of my grandparents, my grandfathers, were not any sort of high-ranking military, they both had to be cremated, and so they are both in two separate crematoriums around the area. But it is very it's very interesting because people always go around all the areas, but we just have to drive all the way into the back, and they're beautiful and everything is very interesting. But it's a very interesting way to go about it because you're kind of like, everyone sees one side of it, and then also it's also weird because it's also a huge tourist attraction for DC. If you either want to go see Arlington House, which was the former house of Robert E. Lee, but is now kind of a visitor center, or you want to see the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. But then I'm just like driving and I'm just like, just going to see my grandma. Like it's very daunting because you can just like run into random tourists when you're just trying to give respects. It's a very interesting.
So
place.
this is a good dovetail. This works
Perfect.
well. So we're looking at all these burials and we look at these memorials, but this comes from, I think, at least from my side, a culture that believes that graves are permanent. And this understanding of permanence varies wildly from different places. There are actually very few cultures other than our own that believe in permanent burials. Most of these other places think that graves are rented. Families have to either pay a huge amount of money up front, or they have to renew the burials, if they're even allowed to renew these burials at all. In active cemeteries, because when a cemetery closes, you don't need to dig people up anymore. You'll find 10-year rentals, 30-year, 50-year, 100 years, and that's just considered normal. And if you think you might find someone in a cemetery, these different national practices might mean that they were there, but they're no longer, and they're now in a mass grave somewhere else or something like that. And that comes up a little bit later in what we do with those remains, but it also ties in with the idea that if the body has decayed, the soul is gone, it's not that person anymore. So there's no question there.
What places do that? Do the kind of rentals? What countries or cultures? Because I'm not as familiar with it.
The next slide, if we move along, we'll start.
I'm getting ahead of myself.
So yes, and yes, Prabakis, Greece is one of them. I was looking at some burials in Greece only yesterday, and they have 3-year rentals in some places and things like that. In Athens, I was looking at 3-year rentals and stuff, and it can be very quick. It's interesting, and when you look at 100-year rentals, the family often have moved away or don't remember that person or something like that. So it's not that common that these things are renewed. So it's usually these things will return and recycle quite a lot.
So
but
where are
Germany
they put after the rental?
The bones are usually put in like a mass grave or somewhere out of the way. That the bones aren't considered things anymore. Wow. And we'll cover this shortly. The ossuaries are quite common and various other ways that you can move these too.
I'm learning new things. This is very interesting.
But Germany's a big example. Germany is probably more regulated in death than life, and Germany is really, really regulated in life. So cemetery burials are mandatory in Germany, even if you're cremated, and they cost a lot of money. But there are cases where you can kind of get around it, and that means doing other things like donating your body to science. And that's something that people have found as a loophole so much that all of the 33 different anatomy institutes in Germany now have to turn you away or charge you because so many people are donating their bodies to science to get out of the cost of either putting your cremated remains or being buried. Yeah.
Wild.
Germany has rentals usually between 10 and 30 years. The graves then reused. And the only people that are allowed to stay are celebrities or people who are notable. And the problem with that is there are so many people who are famous long after they're gone. And so that grave may be long gone also. We can think of Mozart and things like that, buried in a pauper's grave. We'll talk about Mozart a bit later. But the law as well about what you can do with grave markers is really, really strict. Cemeteries in Germany aren't very interesting because there's this uniformity. Everything looks the same. There was one family who put up a little picture of their son who died using, it's like a porcelain picture. It was in Munich. And they did it because there was a famous guy who had a porcelain picture of himself that was in the same cemetery, and they were ordered to remove it, and they said no, it doesn't count, it's illegal. And it was a horrible case, as these grieving parents weren't allowed to do it because the Germans are it has to all look the same, you have to have this uniformity. It takes away any personality that you get with all these other things. it is a shame. And they said we're going to see other examples of this as well as we go through.
Would you say this is post-war? Like, when did some of these rules start
it was
getting
constant? It's all the way through. It's not something that has happened in the modern era. It's something that's been going on.
Wow.
For centuries. Huh. And then if you go to the next slide, there is a counterpoint. From the temporary to the permanent, we have rune stones. I love these. So cool. I studied a little bit in the Faroe Islands, which are probably the smallest place you've never heard of. And they're in between Iceland, Scotland, and Norway. Ooh. And it's just incredible. But they have one there. There's other things. These are probably the oldest memorials that we see in common use in all the land settled by the Vikings. So you see them I think there's one or two in Ireland. There's some in Scotland, the Isle of Man, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Iceland. And they started out being pagan monuments, but they actually became more common when the Vikings converted to Christianity. And they were erected all the way up to the 1100s. And you can still read them today if you can read runes. And they tell stories. They tell you everything about these people's family relationships, all the things they've done, their birth, their death, just like a gravestone we use today, but in way more detail. And they tell the stories so that the person may be gone, but their achievements live forever. And so that's quite cool. And it really shows that even with 1,000 years between us, this original culture's gone. There is no more Viking culture, but the intention of what a memorial is, like we see in, say, ancient Egypt or anywhere else, hasn't really changed much at all. And that's a big thing to think about. So you've just put the note in there.
Yes, just for anyone who...
Yeah, for those of you of sensitive nature, we're going to count. We're going to do 1, 2, 3 and next, and then go to the next slide. So if you want to do the count.
1, 2, and 3.
There we go.
Also,
so, Catacomb Saints.
That's the fun. Nell wants to be a bog body, and I just love that for you. Because to be honest, when I learned about the body farm, which is I think there are some in Europe, but I don't know nearly as how many. There are quite a few in America and Canada. It's a different version of donating to science. So that forensic anthropologists can study how human remains decompose, and I am very pro body farm, and I feel like bog body pro body farm, yes, because I think it's an interesting part of donating my body to science that I think that coexist with like what I do in my daily life, and so I'm very interested in that kind of process, but. Go be a bog body. For
the barrel of brandy, but
barrel of brandy. Honestly, it's rising up the scale. That sounds pretty great.
So, Catacomb Saints, you might have seen, you might have not. If you haven't, this is going to be cool. It's another form of permanence. It comes with that reverence, but it's a bit strange. These are skeletons decorated in all kinds of gold and gemstones. If we move to the next slide.
Whoa.
There we go. Yeah, they are awesome. Whenever I'm in Germany or Switzerland or Austria, I look out for these, and they're just they're beautiful. It's kind of ironic that these are common in those areas, in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, places that we've just discussed how little time that common folk get to spend in a cemetery.
Yeah.
But these were kind of a Catholic attempt to keep people from joining that newfangled Protestantism that was going around. They were being lured away by all the cool things that Protestantism had, and they said, well, we need something cool as well. So they made this, and this is breathtaking objectively, but it's a practice with more issues in the New York Times, really. There's a lot of problems with it, and we'll cover that next. If you go to the next slide.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So
wow.
the Vatican ordered for bodies to be exhumed from the catacombs of ancient Rome, which they rediscovered in 1578. And they named the remains, and then they sold them to churches all around, mostly German-speaking Europe. And there were thousands of these bodies in these catacombs, but the catacombs didn't really have much information inside. So the people could have been, and this is what they were telling everyone, early Christian martyrs, but there was no guarantee that they were. They were just people of ancient Rome that were being pulled out and being sold on.
Silliest thing I've ever heard in my life.
It gets worse. So it was simony, which is a thing that means it's selling of relics, which is banned.
Yes.
To do this, but the church got around this. So the body was free, But you had to be charged for the decoration, you were charged for the blessing, you were charged for the transportation. There were other ways. They get you on the hidden extras.
They
It's like
get
Spirit
you.
Airlines or Ryanair of bodies.
The damn
It was kind of
church,
weird.
man.
Yeah,
Everything.
a lot of
It's just wild.
yeah, a lot of rich families, they really wanted one of these in their local church, because usually they had a family church, or it was the church for that village, and that family was the big family, and it would give them some status if that church had one of these. So it was really convenient that these big rich families went to the church and said, hey, have you got anything that's connected to our town, or is from maybe a distant relative of ours, or something like that? And the church always was really, really good at finding people, just sheer coincidence. Family names, people with the same names, the more the money was on the table, the faster it happened, but they all kept happening. It was really fast and loose. There were loads of fakes that were being discovered over the years. And this is an example. This guy's still around. He's still in a church. And he is Saint Pancras, or Saint Pancratius, depending. So you might know if you live in London, or you've been to London, the big station. He's one of the patron saints of London. It's a beautiful monument. It's incredible. It probably inspired loads of people over the centuries. But if you know anything about saints, Saint Pancras died at the age of 14, and he was beheaded. So his head was sent to London when he was killed, and so the body, one, has a head, which is one like big glowing marker that it's not him.
Yeah.
And two, is not a 14-year-old boy. It's clearly an adult. So it's not him. So it's happened a lot. This is one of those things that really makes things go.
Annoying. That's so annoying.
It's crazy. But I guess as to a medieval peasant seeing this and thinking, wow, I'm in the presence of a saint, and look at how incredible they are, it must have been a big thing. And so I can understand how it kept people in the right place.
In comparison to like the other relics that you see at a lot of Catholic churches, which is like the fingernail of somebody, like this is impressive. Like this is amazing, but yeah, that's wild. And Hyper Helen, Stiff by Mary Roach is a great book. It was actually one of my textbooks for my forensic anthropology class. It's all about the body farms. So great recommendation for a book for sure. I was gonna say, no, this is literally the relic hunting. Like this again, that's exactly what Dapper said. They're trying to get around one of the big reasons that Martin Luther helped Protestantism is like, why are you selling relics? But they're not selling the body. They're selling the extras, the upgrades.
There are quite a few relics that there are definitely, physically can only be one of these things, and there are many in different churches around the world. I think, are there 2 or 3 holy foreskins? And other things that is, it's all fun.
There's just always like that. 3 pinkies of somebody. You're like, that's not how that works.
I mean, I would love to see Jesus with all of those fingers. This kind of 50-fingered. I mean, that's why people really liked him. He was just absolutely incredible to look at.
So many fingers. Yeah.
Yeah, so many fingers, so many heads, so many knees.
So many kneecaps, just so many. Yeah. It's just,
like
it is wild.
Giant spider-like.
I was gonna say he's gonna be one of the religiously acceptable, or the biblical angels, with all the eyes. Like that's what Jesus actually looked like, just so everyone knows.
I don't know how far I can go with this. This is I feel like I'm getting kicked out of any kind of afterlife from this. But the more I think of Jesus as a giant spider with many hands and legs and arms, the more I enjoy it. But yeah, maybe we should stop there. So next slide.
Next slide.
50-Fingered Jesus is a great name for a band. I think that's great.
I agree. I agree.
Like
50-Fingered Jesus. I love good band names. That's so good.
And good high fives.
Good high fives.
Yeah.
Great high fives.
Or if he came from somewhere more genetically connected, he could give you a good high 6. But we're out of the skeletons for now. If you've got closed eyes and everything else, but we've moved to Paris because France and Paris gives us 2 really cool examples of burial customs, and both of which are world renowned for very different reasons. The next slide, please.
Oh, I already know what this
Paris
is
has
about.
an incredible contribution. Yeah. If you don't speak French, I will translate. Arrête c'est si l'empire de la mort. Stop. This is the Empire of the Dead, which can't get more both French, ominous, and evil. And I think that's
Dramatic.
great. It's the drama,
The
the
drama.
excitement. So good. The next slide,
I was
please.
gonna say this is one thing I did not do when I was in Paris, and
Oh, it's great. You got to get up
I
early if you want
slightly
to go to
regret
see it.
it, but slightly don't. I like these things, but I don't like caves, and I feel like I'm not scared of the bodies. I'm scared of being underground. So that's a separate fear.
There are some cool stories about this that we're going to cover shortly that
Very
might make you
excited.
think differently about it. But yeah, Paris was a city that was incredibly crowded for centuries. It was one of the biggest cities in Europe throughout most of European history. It had a huge population, and bodies kept being removed from cemeteries to fit new people in. The bones were packed into boundary walls. Anything they could put them in, they'd put the bones. But this was getting worse and worse, and they didn't really have a solution. So the main cemetery of the city, Les Innocents, was now, because they would put soil over the top so they could bury people again on top, was 6 foot tall. And the laws that meant that people couldn't use the cemetery other than for this, and, they to try and cut down the number of burials didn't really do much. So in 1780, the weight of all these graves made a basement wall of one of the properties that was next to the cemetery collapse completely. And this was the breaking point. All the burials within city walls from that point on were banned. They said, no more, this is too much. If you go to the next slide. Paris was full of old limestone mines. Most of them were completely uncharted because they just dug. They didn't map them. They didn't care. They took the limestone out and they left. So it was pretty amateurish. It wasn't big, anything else. But the city authorities put two and two together and they made this new proposal. What if we got all those bones from all those mining passageways and we put them out of sight, out of mind in all of these old limestone mines? And it took 2 years to completely empty these cemeteries, and more than 6 million people were buried in these new catacombs. And initially, it was just for storage. They just thought, put them in there, don't worry about it. But from 1874, they started to make it into a bit of a tourist attraction, at least in the parts that had been mapped and made safe because of this nature. There's an incredible number of entry points, incredible number of different ways in and out, an incredible number of different corridors that many people haven't mapped at all. So you probably noticed the red dot. So if you want to do a 1, 2, 3 again as we move to look at some pictures.
1, 2, 3.
Here we
Oh
go.
my god.
So to do this, they took the mountains of the bones and they transformed them. So these are some examples of what it was like before. These are photos from the original period in 1874 when they decided to do something about this. So they wanted to bring a sense of order to what we can see. Let's see, there's a question there. Secular societies dealt with burials, and this is like literally a few slides to go, so it will come. But yes, if you watch back at this later, Prabakis, you'll see the answer because I've got a number of slides on that, but it will come and it will make a lot of sense. But it's a big question that has a big answer. If you move to the next slide. They made really neat walls. They made sense of all these parts that I visited, but these are not fully mapped, as we said. So they go on for miles. During World War II, the French resistance used to use them to hide from the Nazis, and they would go under, they would come back, they would do things. It was used as bomb shelters, used as command areas and command centers for the Nazis. People have been known to have gotten lost in the catacombs and never found again. There are a number of urban explorers that go in there, and if you lose your torch or you run out of battery and you can't find your way back, or often because it's so confusing, you just get lost and then run out of battery. It's incredibly dangerous because you cannot find your way back. That might be it. And it's a testament that we really don't know what's down there as we dive deeper. In 2004, French police were walking through the catacombs and they found a fully equipped movie theatre. It had electricity, it had phone lines, it had a projector, it had film reels, and had a fully stocked bar and a full restaurant. And the police heard about this, told people, said, right, we're going to go back, we're going to raid it, we're going to find out who's there, and we're going to catch these people. When they went back the following month, everything was gone. There was just a note on the floor that said, ne cherchez pas, do not search. And I think that's incredible.
I know the French people so dramatic. Dramatic. Oh God.
Oh, it's great.
Like,
They must have had a contact somewhere or something, but it's an incredible.
you said that was 2004?
That was 2004. Yeah.
Jeez Louise. Oh my God, that's just
There are still people
wild.
that do urban exploration and things like that. And I think Airbnb did a contest recently where you could sleep for the night in there.
Oh,
in another area of it. But
to the no.
Some people like it.
Absolutely not. This is my thing, is that, like, I respect that ghosts probably exist, but I don't want them haunting my life. And this is somewhere where I expect ghosts to be, so why do I gotta go? No, I don't like that.
I think if somewhere's going to be haunted, it will collect in somewhere where there are 6 million bodies. I think
Yeah,
it's probably
yeah.
likely.
If people like, if you go by all the weird theories that it's like some people can't move on, or some people like they do move on, like 6 million, there is a high percentage that at least if you get 20, what is 20% of 66 million? It's like there could be millions of some number that I can't do the math for, but like 100,000 or something. It's like insane. Freya, we actually did cover this. There are bodies in the ground everywhere. we literally said this earlier because as a child, I had been told to hold my breath when I passed by cemeteries so ghosts don't scare me. But as a young child, I thought, that doesn't make any sense because there are bodies everywhere. We actually just talked about this.
I would call it ground B&B as well for this. I think Airbnb is a little ambitious. It's too underground for that.
Ground B&B,
Yes, so if we go to the next slide. We're done with the bones again, for those of you with eyes closed, and we're going to go above ground, and we're going to find a solution for the same problem with the catacombs, also in Paris. Napoleon had another plan, and I know you mentioned there, Polaroid, about people taking bones as souvenirs. One thing I didn't cover is the Capuchin catacombs crypts in Palermo, and those are embalmed bodies in a way that now has been lost and art formed. It's an incredible place, and a lot of people have taken souvenirs over the years of different body parts and different things. I hear a story of someone that was in there and heard a noise and thought there might have been some ghost or something, and they found an American sailor who was on sort of leave trying to pull out one of the teeth of one of the bodies to take home as a souvenir and things like that. So these things do happen. I don't understand why you'd want to curse yourself forever or something like that, but go ahead. So it does happen. And
not the souvenir I want to grab. No, thank you.
Yeah. We don't get to cover that one in this because I know you've all got to go to bed at some point, but it's cool to look at that. There's someone in there that's been embalmed. She's a little girl. She's called the last person to have been embalmed there. She's called Sleeping Beauty because of the fact she just looks like she's asleep. She's a little 2 or 3 year old girl. Really interesting. But back to Paris. So Napoleon had this plan. He created Père Lachaise Cemetery. It's the largest burial ground in Paris. It's 110 acres of memorials. It starts with the common folk because it's unconsecrated ground, as we talked about a little bit earlier as well. And it also has huge mausoleums of the rich and famous. It was the world's first garden cemetery. So it's not just a memorial, but it's a pleasant place to go, to spend time, to enjoy nature, to embrace the space and make them kind of multifunctional rather than just for memorials. And you'll see famous people here: Oscar Wilde, Chopin, Edith Piaf, and there are more. If we go to the next slide.
Yeah.
And when we walk through all these beautiful tree-lined avenues and everything, we can say that the cemetery was almost a failure. When it opened, there were only a few dozen people that were buried in there, and it was a real struggle to get people to want to be buried in it. And although now it's in central Paris, at the time, it was too far from the city and no one wanted to travel that far. So they exhumed and removed the remains of a French poet, Jean de La Fontaine, and the playwright Molière in the first year. They hoped then that it would raise the profile. People want to be buried near the famous folk. And it did all right, but it didn't do very well. And it took Napoleon's wife, Josephine, to have a bit of a brainwave. She changed all of this. So in 1817, the famed 12th century Parisian lovers, Abelard and Eloise, were moved to the cemetery. And they were buried there together near the entrance. And that captured the imagination and the hearts of everyone in Paris. The pair were in love, but they'd been separated when their relationship was discovered. And they wrote beautiful love letters to each other for the rest of their lives. Even though that they never got to reunite, those letters still survive today. And a lot of people think they are the testament of romantic love, and they're wonderful. So bringing them back together in death, the rightful place by each of the sides was a really big thing, and it was something that really made people feel like they wanted to be there too. So the burials rose from a few dozen to 33,000 in only a couple of years, and the cemetery then became that big success that it was today. If we go to the next slide.
It's wild though that they think that they can just like the emperor can just pick up somebody famous's body and just move it. That is a little wild to think about.
Oh, it's common. Yeah. We'll see it in another example shortly as well. But yeah, it's a big thing of doing that. It's something that does happen a number of times.
It's a little wild.
And you say about the one in New Orleans as well. I think there are French styles that do. We mentioned about culture and fashion. I think a lot of New Orleans emulated French fashion in a way of kind of preserving that connection. And a lot of the building at that point happened, as well as the practicalities of being above ground, the idea of these garden cemeteries and things. Not as prominent, because there were these practical things to go in as well, but certainly there was a great element that invested in things. And I see, Zintaus, you're kind of seeing where we're going already. You're getting there already. But we've got some other places to go to before we go back to London. So an issue we'll see again and again in these examples, as the population gets bigger, the world modernizes, where do you put all these people? And when it comes to death and burial, we've got to do something, and it was solved in a great number of different ways. First, we're going to go somewhere else. The next slide, please.
Oh,
Prague.
There we go.
It's our next destination because it's got something really unique when it comes to looking at different cultural traditions. So you can see in the photo here, this is Prague Old Jewish Cemetery. It was used from the 1400s to around 1787 because around the lands of the Austrian Empire, Joseph II, the emperor, passed a law 3 years earlier, 1787, banning burials in town centres for hygiene reasons. And there's a spoiler alert that's going to come back to bite us very shortly, so remember that law. But the 20th century gives us the reason why so many Jewish cemeteries no longer exist as they were intended. Another spoiler, we're going to see that later as well. But this has around 100,000 people buried inside and around 12,000 graves. So the Nazis did their thing in Europe in the 30s and 40s, and I don't think that's a spoiler, but they weren't really the nicest of people. And they were really, really aware of the power of history and monuments and all this kind of stuff. So they wanted to completely erase the Jewish people from the world, and that meant destroying every trace of their existence. And that included the burial grounds, all their cemeteries, all their sacred sites, all their buildings, except this single cemetery in Prague. And this was left entirely untouched, completely intact. And it's mentioned in hushed tones for an incredibly strange and macabre reason why this happened. That this was going to be the centerpiece of a museum of an extinct race that would show people in the future what had gone before from the Nazi perspective, and controlling the narrative and showing what these people were. And so this was going to be a thing that explained how this worked, and reshaping that account of the 20th century. And so if we move to the next slide.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it gets big. So this cemetery gets...
Yeah, there we go. I was gonna say that brought tears to my eyes. This is the most crazy thing I've ever heard in my life. But it's such
you've
a
gone
Nazi
forward
thing
one
to do.
too far.
Oh, I have? There we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
But
We got
good. So this is a really good place to see the Jewish traditions with a good example, because it stood for so many years. The Jewish faith has a massive amount of respect for the deceased, and old graves can't be reused and bodies can't be moved. So with a long history of persecution as well, it's really difficult to get people to sell land to the Jewish community. So expansion of cemeteries doesn't really happen either. So they had to make a new solution, and this is the result. So they would pour new soil on top of the existing cemetery, and they would bury on top in the new soil, and they would leave that original grave where it was. So in some cases, you'll find up to 12, and that's not an exaggeration. There's 12 layers in cemeteries like this, and they just keep going up and up. So if you've seen some old Jewish cemeteries, they've often got those retaining walls that are higher than the streets around them, and that's to keep all this soil in as they keep building and building. But as they added the new levels, they did one of two things to the gravestones. They either laid them flat and covered them over, which kept them preserved, so they're still there, but they can't be seen. Or, and what we see here, they raised them up along with the soil, and they put them next to the new grave. So
Got
that's why
it.
we see this forest of graves, and it shows that these people aren't buried so tightly; they're buried on top of each other as well. And so some of these stones are commemorating people in the same place but buried further down, and it just still gives you a place for these people to commemorate their ancestors.
Wild.
I see the thing saying about the New Orleans being influenced by the Spanish. It was. This is the thing about culture being. You can get cultural influences from lots of places at once, and they do blend together in wonderful ways. So it was New Orleans is a great mix of Spanish, French, and early American and other things. It's exciting. It's great, and other sort of things that came into it. And it's a bit of a mix of the water level, the practicality, and also the Spanish and French practices.
Yeah.
So there's a combination of all of it. And did they remove a David star? No, they didn't. There were lots. You'll see lots in here of different engravings, different markings, different symbols that also are very Jewish. But this was kept preserved because of that idea to make this a museum. So it was quite a strange thing.
Very weird.
And if we move to the next slide.
It's very weird to thank them for doing that.
Yeah, let's thank the Nazis. Let's take a moment to thank.
But it is. There is like weird things that like this happens sometimes where like almost for the posterity's sake, people who are so like innately evil or wanting so prejudiced against something, they will save things to kind of show off, and it's just like. It's just like, how can our mindset be so different when technically it's like that's what museums do, is we preserve everything that we can and we try not to keep it like they're doing exactly what any sort of curator or museum professional would do to try to tell the story of something, but you're just telling the wrong side of the story. Like it's just very strange.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about those guys, is that when we think of them, I imagine when even when we say the word, everyone here has got a vision, and that vision is basically what they wanted to be remembered for because of all their parades and spectacle and uniforms and everything else. The idea of them being all efficient and powerful and uniform and all this sort of thing, that's their illustration of themselves, when actually they were incredibly incompetent in different ways and bad and terrible, and we're still using their portrayal because they have controlled the narrative using the power of spectacle, of history, of eternity in a way that really illustrated that. And that's a big problem when you come to analyze this stuff, that some people are better at narration of history than others. So there are many cultures that just aren't very good at telling their own story, like Carthage, where there isn't much of a Carthaginian account of history. It all comes from the Romans, who didn't like the Carthaginians. So you get the bias, and so it changes. We can't have an objective view, and I think we can't really have an objective view on that part of history as well, because of the fact that there's been a sort of insidious leaking in that there are many any kind of visual thing we look at, any kind of parade or anything is this projection, and we're taking the projection at face value, which is
visual can be sometimes supersede
it's
any
giving
sort of
them what they want.
Visual tends to, especially for the visual learners, like it'll supersede anything else you learn about them, and you'll just see those images over and over again, when the things that the incompetency, the unorganization, like those things you don't see. So even if you read about it and you know that is true, that's a very good point. The images that you see are going to surpass that. Absolutely.
Yeah. And while we're in Prague still, I wanted to highlight another memorial these are around Europe, but they're particularly common here. So you might see them in other places. They're called Stolpersteine, or in English, stumblestones. And you'll see them on the ground if you go to different places in Europe, particularly Vienna, Budapest, Prague,
places Berlin,
in Germany.
There
are some in Berlin. There are.
I think I've seen this in Berlin.
On the ground. Yeah. If you don't look, you won't really see them. But they're a really cool tribute. An artist called Gunter Demnig started making them in the 1990s. They're now in 2,000 cities around the world, 26 countries. It's the largest decentralized war memorial in the world. And if you move to the next slide. They're put in the ground right in front of the last freely chosen residence of someone who's been deported during the Holocaust. So a lot of Jewish people have these memorials, but you'll find other people. You'll find Roma, Sinti, homosexuals, dissidents, the disabled, Freemasons, and it's always written in a local language. So in Prague, you see details of the fate. So you see here Zavrazdina, which means female, Zavrazden for male, for murdered. If that's the different versions of gendered word. Ozvozbozena for liberated. And you'll see families as well, with each individual having a stone of their own. So the relationships between them you can see, and that's something interesting to see. But it's a really fitting way to pay tribute to those who might not have a grave to find, but they still have that lasting memorial. And when they're installed, they always invite a living relative of that individual to be present when they reveal it, which is a really nice thing. And I really enjoyed talking to the organisers of this and learning more about it. I think it's an incredible thing, and said you will miss them if you don't look for them, or you don't have a map, or you don't look for anything online about them. But they are really interesting to think, this person stood here and now they're not here, and I think that's a really moving thing to think about. Yeah. I see you seeing there. So Germany, Italy. It's nice to see that
26 countries. That's very impressive.
Yeah. There was one being placed in the Netherlands, I think, last week or something. I watched the ceremony online and things. It's really interesting. And then if we move to the next slide, continue in the path of those who have memorials that no longer exist. So we've covered some reasons why they may not exist. But if we move now to London, as Zinthouse predicted, somewhere with loads of history. But before we start to dig into the ground, which over the course of 2,000 years, London has shifted and evolved. Buildings have risen and fallen, cemeteries that were heavily used. Often they can be reused by removing the graves. Yeah, we've seen that. But in many cases, they fall into disuse. They get built over and they just get completely forgotten. We always have to strike this balance between an evolution of a city and progress, and respect the dead, but also respect the living and move forward with the living. So you can imagine how many people in a city over 9 million over the millennia have been buried in this place. And this means this is a big example of what happens when we lose people. If we move to the next slide.
Oh, yeah.
There are notable examples like this, the Hardy tree. So these are stones removed from their original places by architects when they expanded London St Pancras train station. All of these hundreds of stones were thought to have been put around an ash tree in St Pancras churchyard, where it was thought they wouldn't be disturbed by the new railway, by the poet and novelist Thomas Hardy, who we'll come back to very shortly. And the story hasn't been completely verified. It may not have been him. Some have even said the tree wasn't even there before the 1920s. But this fusing of man and nature as the stones are kind of being absorbed into the tree itself, I really like that. Yeah. It brings in mind this reminder that we can be reclaimed by the earth, but so can our resting places if we don't continue to renew them and care for them. And the tree no longer exists, by the way, if you want to go and see it, or if you remember seeing it and everything else. It died of a fungal infection and was cut down only about a year ago. So I guess that shows even now that the things are still in motion.
I was going to say, are stones still there? Or do they
stones are still there, but the tree is not.
The majority of the tree. So, got it.
Yeah, some is there, but it's been cut down. And if we move to the next slide, we see another disused burial ground in London, just outside the jurisdiction of the city, an area that became known for theatres, bear baiting, brothels, all the things that were really cool and fun that weren't allowed inside the city itself. So there are up to 15,000 people buried here. And the first mention of it in any records is in the 1500s, although we know it was being used earlier. And it ran right until it was closed in about 1853. So it was unconsecrated ground, so it's thought to have been used at least in part for prostitutes, who were known locally as Winchester geese, because they were licensed by the Bishop of Winchester to work in the area. But be aware, though, there are a number of them in this cemetery, and it's quite sad, really, that we have to make this distinction and be really clear. If you have a relative or anything buried in here, it was a pauper cemetery most of all. So for the parish of London, St Saviour's Parish, it's full of all kinds of people who fell on hard times. It's not just sex workers, it's many different people. They just happen to perform a significant minority. It was closed in 1853. It was completely full. They sold it for redevelopment in the 1880s, but no one developed over it. But it was later converted into warehouses, and they just forgot about it. When the Museum of London excavated the site in 1991, when they started to extend the Jubilee line, if you know about the London Tube, they found this really crowded space. And the dig in 1992 found 148 graves from 1800 to 1853. They were mostly all women, and over a third of them were either in the later stages of pregnancy or died within a week of giving birth. And 11% of the bodies were under a year old. So you can see in this picture, it was turned into kind of a memorial garden for those folk who fell on hard times. And today, people leave huge numbers of tributes, toys for the children, ribbons, and they feel in a lot of ways that these unnamed folk deserve to be honoured. And they have these candlelit vigils. They really take the time to say, well, they've been forgotten, but they won't be forgotten anymore. So you can see that online. You can see on YouTube the videos of these vigils, and you can even visit them and do them yourself and attend. It's quite open and public. But it's a really nice monument and a movement. If we move to the next slide. So these aren't the only unknown remains in London. There are so many new construction projects that wind their way through the city. There are all kinds of occasions when bodies are uncovered in forgotten cemeteries. I see, Nell, you mentioned plague pits. We're gonna talk about that just in a second. The latest subway extension was a great example. They did find plague pits. They had to stop construction and make sure that there was no plague to get out and do its thing. Bedlam Cemetery, the famous asylum cemetery, and even the person who discovered Tasmania was discovered when they did the subway extension. One of Australia's founding fathers. They discovered him because he still had the plate around his neck that identified who he was. And he was supposed to be buried with his cat as well, who was also famous. If you see the statue of Matthew Flinders, he's always with his cat, who travelled with him to Tasmania and back. So I don't know if they found the cat, but it's notable. He's supposed to have been buried with his cat. But there's one particular discovery I want to bring in, and this is a single young Roman girl. She was aged between 13 and 17. She died between 350 and 400 AD, and she was found in 1995. And this is where the story gets poignant. So this was discovered during the construction of the Gherkin, which is that big, strange-looking
pickle.
Pickle that you can see there, of course. I was going to take in a very different direction, but that's great. That pickle is fine.
Well, a gherkin is another American word for a pickle, so there's something called a gherkin pickle. So I think it looks like a pickle.
It just looks just great. That's what it definitely looks like, and I've just got that kind of mind. But the building was being constructed because the area was destroyed by an IRA bomb in 1992. And in that bomb, 3 people died, including a girl who was 15 years old. So it seems like a sign in some ways that this lone Roman, quite strange really even being there, because Roman burials tended to be outside of the city rather than inside the city walls. She had nothing else to identify her at all. We don't know if she was rich or poor, how she came to be buried there. But after the building was completed, they put her back where she was discovered. So if you go to the next slide. She was reburied at the base of the building, and this inscription was installed. So this is a connection between ancient and modern London. We see in both English and Latin, to the spirits of the dead, the unknown young girl from Roman London lies buried here. So even with 1600 years between the deaths of these 2 young girls at the exact same place, both were given the same reverence and buried properly. So she was buried with ancient Roman funeral rites, that they gave a full funeral to her. And it's really fitting that she lies back at the place where she was put originally, where she was meant to last for all time. I see the question, do we know if the girl died in Boudicca's raids in Londinium? I think that was earlier, if I remember right. The raids and things like that, I think, that's right, in the early 1st century. There are incredible amounts of things and artifacts from there. The Roman camp that Boudicca kind of arrived on was in Shoreditch, and the church there, St Leonard's Church, is the place where that was, and there they were excavating that in the Victorian era, and they called it New Golgotha because of the amount of burnt bone fragments and artifacts they were finding, because she descended upon it and just decimated absolutely everything. So it was a little bit further to the east as well. This was an interesting one, but yes, so slightly different, but we just don't know who she was or what she did or anything. It's one of those things. So we just gave her an unknown burial, but with the rights that she would have been given at the time, and back where someone obviously wanted to put her. And because this was so unique of a burial, they decided, they must be for a reason, so let's put her there. If we go to the next slide.
I'll interject with one interesting story, because I have not been able to work on any sort of actual graves as like a bioarchaeologist or anything, but I was on an excavation in DC, District of Columbia, the capital, where we were in. It was a PhD student's like dissertation was this specific excavation, because they were looking at investigating a individual named Yarrow Malmut, who was a free African American Muslim man in the pretty much revolutionary era and then a little bit afterwards. And he kind of was able to free himself, and then he purchased a plot of land in Georgetown, which is a very fancy area of DC. Well, nowadays. And he supposedly lived until he was about 110, maybe higher. And essentially some white man found him very an interesting person. So he interviewed him and got portraits done of him. So we have two separate portraits of him, one in DC, I think one is in Philadelphia. And then when eventually Yarrow died, this white dude put in every single paper on like the entire Eastern Seaboard that he died. But he mentions at the bottom of the obituary that Yarrow, in the Muslim custom, was buried in his backyard. And so this PhD student was investigating if Yarrow was buried in the backyard. And we had to excavate, and it was a little jarring, because you're just like, are we just gonna find him? Like, I don't know. And that we ended up not finding him, and this was probably just a more lore of some sort. But what we did find was a dog burial from somebody who had lived in the house after Yarrow had lived there. But they did find a dog. And so I think about that a lot, because I wonder where he is, because he's very famous in a very small, like, little, like, DC community. And but we have no evidence where he actually is besides this, and we've investigated it, and he wasn't there. So, though a couple years after I did that excavation, a body was found in Georgetown, literally like 2 streets off of it, and my mom sent it to me and was like, is this that guy? And I was like, I don't know, man. And like, I was doing research, and it turns out that they probably just built these houses over like an old cemetery at some point. But I saw that and I was like, oh my god, his backyard's just bigger than we thought it was. Because that was another thing that I thought about, is like, you think if Georgetown was, I don't know how inhabited it was at the time, he could have been in an area outside of the plot that he owned that is his backyard. But yeah, my one graveyard story, because I still think about him a lot, because I'm wondering where he is, especially a freeman African-American Muslim man. There's probably not a lot of cemeteries that would take him, you could assume, at that time.
Yeah, it goes back to that consecrated and unconsecrated ground and other things as well. So if we move, there we go. So now we're going to get Egypt-y.
Let's go.
Here we go. And we're going to go back and forth, and we're going to just get more and more pyramidic. I'm trying to think of different ways to say it, but that'll do.
Are we going to become pyramidiates?
Oh,
it's not a good pun. It's not. I will say it's not a good pun, because that is technically what Egyptologists call idiots who think pyramids are power plants. So it's not a good pun, but that's the only one I got.
I mean, I'm notable in that the longer we go on, the more I drink. So we don't know where this is going to go as we keep.
I was wondering that. I was like, that looks like a cider, and I was like, and that looks so good.
Yeah, it is a cider. Oh! And then there's the other cans next to it. It's gonna be great fun. So let's see what we go on. So here we go. London was a really big hub of the Industrial Revolution as well, and that really big growth was really hard to contain. So there was still that urbanization, cemeteries getting bigger and bigger, and they needed a solution. And during the 1820s, they needed a way to solve this. So the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, poetry of Percy Shelley, that'll come back, and so much more gave this huge rise to this obsession with ancient Egypt all the way across Europe. And this was exactly at the time that this was proposed. So the architect thought, what better than to copy the Great Pyramid of Giza? So this would have been made from marble, topped with an observatory, and cost £7 million even at the time. So you can even imagine the cost in today's money. If we go to the next slide.
That's a lot. Oh, wait, go. Click.
Yep. This would have been 90 stories tall, 18 acres in size, and full of catacombs that hold 24 coffins each. So a total capacity of 5 million people. It would have been taller than St. Paul's Cathedral, and it would have totally transformed the skyline of London. So you can imagine how outlandish this was, but it was seriously considered. It was a real thing that came very close to being put into practice, and it would have totally changed the London skyline. It would have been incredible. But when you've visited London, you'll know there is no Grand Pyramid. So yeah, the design did lose out. It lost out to those people who had gone to Père Lachaise and thought, you know what, maybe there's a better idea. If we go to the next slide, though.
That is a wild design. And it's so early, because I feel like I would see some of these designs a little bit later. Like, this is like an insane design for that time period. Like,
it's a bit
wild.
Yeah, it's quite full on. I said the idea of preparing for the future is something that comes up in another example we use later, but this is the time when urban planning starts to come and they go, hang on a minute, we can't just prepare for the dead we have now, we have to prepare for the dead that are going to come. And they make these big plans for the future. So 5 million dead would mean it would have filled up in about 2006.
Wow.
So they'd have looked at something else then.
That is wild to think about. Oh my gosh. That's wild. And as Nell says, I'm only calling this Corpse Mountain. That's the only thing that this can be called. That is...
Well, speaking of Corpse Mountain...
Oh
no! People keep coming back to this idea. In 2006, a German guy, Ingo Niemann, he was a writer, made proposals for a new Great Pyramid in Germany. He got together with an economist, an engineer, and a few others, and they got given €100,000 from the government to move forward with this plan. So this is something that the government said, we want you to look into this and judge the feasibility.
Okay.
It's not to be gotten into like the British plan. It's not like a thing that you would walk inside, but every stone will contain the ashes of an individual. And it was originally going to be the largest building ever constructed by humankind, 1,600 feet tall. But they scaled it back because that's obviously a bit silly. So now it's only going to be...
It would have been taller than the actual Great Pyramid of Giza, if I'm correct. I don't know how tall it is.
Yeah, it was like 3 times the height, and 4 times the height. Yeah, and also taller than like Burj Khalifa. It's a big thing, and it's going to have a massive square. You'd see it from space, but you'd also probably see it from the sun.
Oh my God.
But they've scaled it back. So, they're not mad. It's now only going to be 492 foot. So only 10 foot taller than the Great Pyramid. So it's probably not even worth bothering with. But expect more news on this soon, because I'd call it a 50-50 at this point. It's still in the planning stage. The designers are basically, with their funding from the government, are either going to get this done or be committed to an asylum, and I'd call this 50-50 at this point.
And where is this new Great Pyramid going to be?
It's planned to be in Germany, somewhere in the former East, because they said that this would be a tomb to democracy, which seems a bit another thing to throw in at the last minute. But yeah,
it's not even in like a prominent city. It's just like in the middle of nowhere.
I mean, in a prominent city, it would be the size of that city. So I think it's kind of fair to stick it somewhere else.
I guess that is true, but it's so random. It's
party time for those who like ancient Egypt.
Well, so I was thinking about there's on Wikipedia there's like a sliding chart that's all of the tallest pyramids in the world. Mm-hmm. And so all of obviously the Egyptian pyramids there, and then there's the Bass Pro Shop Pyramid, which is in Memphis, Tennessee, which is an iconic place that I truly, as an Egyptologist, believe everyone should go to. It is a different type of Disneyland. It is very fun. But it's mind-boggling to think, because that's already a wild pyramid to have out there. It's wild to think that the top of that list would be a giant tomb for, I hate to say it, for randos, for random people. Like
Well,
every other pyramid in there is a tomb for a pharaoh who at one point was obviously very great, and it's just a tomb for randos.
well, the original plan was, and you're saying about expecting lots of dead Germans and about this kind of thing, the original plan was to make it the tomb for everyone in humanity. And I think that's why they scaled it down. I think the idea to have everyone in the world being shipped there, I don't think you could make this quickly enough.
No.
With every stone being a person, everything. I think this would become.
And I hate to say it, the way that our population is just like going so fast, I feel like you'll never catch up. It's like
this is
the most wild thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, there was a section of the London Underground for bringing tombs to, bringing bodies to cemeteries in London and things. They call it the Necropolis Railway and things. There's some interesting books and things about it. But yeah, you'd need something like that for this, going from everywhere in the world. You'd have to have sort of maybe those hyperloops or something, just ferrying the dead to be made into blocks to look at and say, yeah, behold, Ash Mountain.
I'm very ashamed that what I was thinking of was like the tube system that you have at banks, where everyone gets their own little their own little pod, and they just suck the body out. I'm very ashamed that's what I was thinking of, but this is wild. So this is great. This is actually very great that I completely forgot that like my actual work has, we've been, for the past couple years, we've been doing a death event where every year it's a little bit different, but it's kind of a place where people can talk about death. And I'm like, this has to be involved. I have to tell this to my coworker in our meeting next week about this, because this seems like a great topic to get people to be like, is this a good idea? Is this just really bad?
I see, Rahab, you mentioned about mixing the ash into the stones. That's what they are doing. Each person has a stone, and that stone is that person, so it'll have their name on, and then it'll become part of the pyramid. So you won't be able to like walk through. You'll just see the pyramid and go, well, my granddad's in there somewhere, and that's it. Pyramid. So it's a weird one.
Which is another weird thing, because I know some religious practices don't, well, I don't know exactly like the specific, but I know some people don't like separating ashes. As someone who literally asked my mother and father if I could consider taking some of my grandma's ashes to put into a necklace, and they were very, very hesitant. And I was like, I didn't think that was a thing. And I'm obviously not a religious person anymore, but I was like, I don't think that was, it's ash. Like, I'm very much like, yeah, that's just a thing. But yeah, that is an interesting.
Yeah, I think that there are lots of different cultures with different ideas and different things, as we've covered some and we'll cover more still. I think some cultures will just never be on board with turning all of their family into bricks and making them into a giant pyramid the size of the largest creation of humanity. It's a stretch. Putting the cement in cement. Oh, I love it. Oh, why do I not?
That's a great one.
Slow. I need to speed up on my puns. This is terrible.
Honestly, my question is, how is this? Think about the consequences of this. How is the person who wants to be at the very, very top? How are they going to have to bribe their way up to get on the pyramidion of this full pyramid? Like, I can just see like go full relic, selling relic, like all that kind of stuff. Like,
But if it's 1,500 foot high, you're going to have to climb all the way to the top to put one of those things in there, and it's going to take you like 6 hours to get to the top and get back down again. I would really not want to be at the top.
Think about that.
So yeah, there's problems. There's a lot of problems.
A lot of problems.
Yeah. If you go to the next slide.
This is the best fun fact I've ever learned, and I'm going to be doing some deep research.
We're going to keep going in all kinds of weird ways.
I'm very excited.
This problem of running out of space is a big one. Obviously, there are some weird ways to solve it, but the process of finding a solution is a new, slow, winding process. Before the mid-1800s, every new cemetery had to be created by a whole separate new law in Britain. You could probably imagine the people who needed them and funded them were mostly people who weren't part of the church, and they needed to give themselves somewhere respectable that they could be buried, and they could have this kind of equality after death that the church didn't give them. So almost all burials in England and Wales, for example, are usually in a parish churchyard before the 1853 Burial Act. London was an exception. That started in 1850, the Metropolitan Interment Act, and that allowed civic burials as a general rule because they had the biggest need and the great rise in population. But parish burials still happen today. They are still being used all the time. And if you go to the next slide, before this 1850 law, London needed solutions. We've seen the pyramid. We know it was never built. What took its place to lighten the load? The Magnificent Seven. These are all created by their own law, each a beautiful garden cemetery, drawing inspiration from Père Lachaise of Paris, Kensal Green, West Norwood, Highgate, Abney Park, Brompton, Nunhead, and Tower Hamlets, all unconsecrated land where all the people of London can be buried, from the lowest to the landed, all of them. We could spend hours looking at all of these, but I wanted to underline, in the first 50 years of the 1800s, the population of London more than doubled from 1 to 2.3 million. So without these cemeteries, the city would have been in an incredibly bad way. And these weren't only resting places, they were parks, they were nature reserves, they're in that Parisian style. There's that famous poem to help illustrate that. For there is good news yet to hear and fine things to be seen before we go to paradise by way of Kensal Green. There were fashionable places to be buried, and they were full of these Gothic tombs and splendour. One of the first places I look for any Victorian burial when I'm looking across London, and they're even still used today, even though they're starting to fill to capacity. If you go to the next slide, we're going to get Egypt here again.
I was going to say, we're going to talk about Highgate. That's the only one I recognize on that list, is the Highgate one.
It's coming back.
I love
this
it.
is the Egyptian Avenue, a portal to the city of the dead. If you go to the next slide.
Oh.
It is flanked by two columns, taking the shape of closed lotus flowers like those at Karnak. And the vaults here in this avenue have a really typical ancient Egyptian feature, the curvetto cornice, which is a kind of concave moulding that you tend to find above the doors of special buildings. This craze started after Napoleon's campaigns in Egypt. We talked a little bit about the Egypt craze a little earlier, but the fashion grew and grew, and this was the most prestigious part of the cemetery. People were dying to get in here. The great and the good...
Yeah, I was waiting for that one.
Waiting for that one. Yeah, and the great and the good were willing to pay a lot of money to reserve space here. We talked about symbolism, and that upside down was a common motif in cemeteries. But one of the coolest things I've seen in the Egyptian Avenue, when you visit, you'll see a lot of those upside down torches to represent life after death. But if you look at the keyholes, even the keyholes are upside down. They went into lots of attention to detail to keep that going and to keep moving along the same way. If you go to the next slide, the Circle of Lebanon follows from the Egyptian Avenue. You can see some of those Egyptian motifs continue, but you might recognize this from loads of movies. It's really iconic. Whenever you want some kind of dark-looking, evil place, they tend to go here and film at night. I remember it from, was it the second Fantastic Beasts movie? That's the one I remember most of all, but there's others. I only watched that recently, but lots of places are in it. It's in there. The name of the circle comes from this really big Lebanese cedar tree that used to stand in the center. They had to cut that down in 2019 and replace it, but it was 280 years at the time. These are the most desirable parts of the cemetery. You can see how they were designed to decay elegantly, and they become gardens of their own, majestic, final resting places. They're all on the west side. You can only get into that with a registered guide. Pretty easy. They run tours like every half an hour, every 20 minutes. So it's not a problem, but you have to go with a guide because they didn't want people wandering around vandalizing things. But the east side is open to everyone at all times. And you'll find lots of other interesting things there as well, like the tomb of Karl Marx, the founder of communism. And for a very capitalistic £10, you can get an entry ticket to visit both. And I'm sure he's spinning in his grave and powering half of London. And that includes the west side and that tour, so it's quite cool to be able to do both. And if we move to the next slide, as we mentioned Egyptology, other people got really into this too, and some people took this to some weird places. So here we see the tomb of William Mackenzie in Liverpool. He lived from 1794 to 1851. He was a civil engineer, but he was a gambler. He was a mad, constant gambler, and it's said that he took a wager with the devil himself. And so he had a plan, because he thought, it came to him in a dream, that Satan was going to come and claim his soul. So he asked to be interred inside the pyramid, sitting on a chair at a table, holding a winning hand of cards, so that when the devil came, he could never beat him and his soul was safe.
I hate that so much. Oh my God, that's so weird to think about.
It's quite weird, but it gets kind of worse because it's not rooted in fact, because this pyramid was made 17 years after his death. So his brother put the pyramid on in alignment with his wishes, but on there it says, beneath here lies him. So perhaps the devil already came to claim him, and it is claimed that the cemetery is haunted. So it's perhaps maybe if people listen to him, he would be fine and still sat there today. Maybe now he's somewhere down below. I don't know. But it's interesting to see how people have co-opted some of those ancient beliefs and merged them with their own a bit and made something new. And Bill and Ted playing games. Yeah, it is kind of like that. I mean, maybe I'm going to put in some noughts and crosses or something like that when I can. I was going to say, stay out.
Technically, the ancient Egyptians in the later parts of the New Kingdom started playing the game Senet against fate to see if you could make it to the afterlife, and I think that's essentially the exact same thing.
It depends how good you are, though. It's not fair in some ways. There's some games I don't want to play. I'm not good at them.
I was going to say, Senet, usually, you never really read about them failing. And that's the kind of funny thing with the Egyptians, is that, like, the Egyptians don't have a hell. Like, they don't really explain what happens if you're, like, they say, oh, your heart gets eaten by Amit. But they don't really explain, like, what happens after that. Like, they sometimes say that there's, like, a sea of fire, but, like, they don't really, it's not very prominent. And so it's kind of this weird little, like, they know that there is a bad place, but everyone gets to the good place, if that makes sense. Like, it's kind of weird. Like, it's kind of weird that they say that. But
yeah.
I see.
It doesn't follow German grave regulations at all.
No, absolutely
it's certainly going to get cast down. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see again another one that also doesn't. So there's a lot of strange Victorian speculation in Egyptology, and these things were running rampant as they were making tombs and trying to incorporate this stuff as quickly as they could when they didn't really understand. I think in an earlier stream that you did some time ago, we looked at the fake needle in Schönbrunn Palace, which is just full of gibberish hieroglyphics because they didn't know what they meant because they hadn't found the Rosetta Stone yet, but they really thought that these things should have hieroglyphics on and just made a weird load of random hieroglyphics. And that kind of thing happened. And it's the same here. They thought that pyramids were staircases for a little while that let the pharaoh climb to heaven. And so they were kind of thinking, well, we need this so we can also climb to heaven in this staircase. They also thought that they were devices that shot the soul into the dark parts of the night sky.
No.
Which is kind of cool. I mean, I want a cool laser cannon on my... Yeah.
Oh, Victorians. The Victorians.
Buried standing upright because he believed it would give an advantage on Judgment Day. That is cool. I didn't know about Thomas Gooding, but that's a nice one.
That's so weird
I like
to think
those
about.
kind of things, yeah. There are a few times when people have been dug up and they're supposedly, they look like they've just gone in and things. There's lots of stories of accounts. In the 1700s and early 1800s, a lot of learned societies would gather together and just dig up random celebrities. And they would record them and sometimes do little line drawings of what they saw. And if you look online, there's a few other places, there are a lot of accounts of them digging up various different English and Scottish kings and queens and saying what they look like and things. And some of them, because of the way they preserved them, were incredibly lifelike and incredibly kind of as they were. Charles I, when he was buried with his head in there, looked like he was asleep, obviously head separated and had dried blood in his neck and things like that, and all this stuff. I think it was, I can't remember which of Henry VIII's wives as well, supposedly incredibly beautiful when she was found, and she looked, much more glamorous and much more beautiful than the portraits and on this sort of thing. And it was,
I was going to say, it wasn't Anna Cleves, was it? Because she's the one that...
It wasn't Anna Cleves. I think it might have been the final one, I think. But I can't remember exactly. I don't want to do the wrong one. But she was buried and she was dug up she was opened in the 1800s. And they did... was it Anna Cleves? Okay, maybe it was Anna Cleves.
Well, because I just said Anna Cleves because I know that the whole point of Anna Cleves was that she was supposedly not as beautiful as her portrait that Henry VIII had seen, but I'm just going to assume it's not one of the ones that is buried in the little church attached to the Tower of London, because I know that in the past the government has been very stingy to let people in there, because when it comes with like the boys in the tower and stuff, which are like somewhere in there, I've heard people are very stingy about.
Yeah, that's down to the royal family. I think it's the royals have not allowed, but I think King Charles has actually moved that forward relatively recently.
I have heard that.
He's interested in finding identity. I think, yeah, I trust Bonji. I know he knows his
Catherine
stuff,
Parr.
so there we go. But we're talking about Catherine Parr. Was that the
She's
one?
the last
okay.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're 1782. So I like it when people can fact check me, and that's why I don't say the exact fact when I know I'm not right.
I was gonna say
I can't go wrong.
Usually my mod Alex is here, and she's my Googler. Whenever I don't know anything, Alex Googles it and tells me if I'm wrong or not.
Yes, so there we go. But yeah, it's a big tradition, and they did like Edward Longshanks. When they opened his tomb, they did the drawings and things, and they said he was incredibly tall, and it proved the story of him being a tall man. They said he was probably around 6 foot tall, and so it was interesting. And these drawings, when they exist, are really interesting to look at. But in a time of all this individualism, that idea of continuing into eternity in the 18th and 19th century was a big thing. So even smaller tombs around Europe, you'll find a number of these strange pyramids for different reasons, but an attempt to kind of emulate those ancient Egyptian traditions in a way to also hopefully continue into eternity as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the next slide, we're going to go to a new nation, the 1800s, but very similar problems to London, but they approached it in a very different way, probably because of that cultural difference that we noted in the start. So if we move to the next slide again. Milan is a city in the north of Italy. The heart of all this industrialization in the 1800s, its metro area is one of the largest in the European Union and the largest in Italy by far, and it grew just like London. They needed new cemeteries, and they made the Cimitero Monumentale, which is a monumental cemetery where they consolidated a number of smaller cemeteries from around the city. So they opened it in 1866, and they were already forward thinking. They opened the first crematorium in the Western world in 1876 in the same area. If we go to the next slide, unsurprisingly, probably where it is, it's full of the graves of some of the wealthiest industrial families in Europe, and they wanted people to know it. Most of them didn't inherit their riches. They became rich in their lifetime, and this was a chance to show the world that they'd made it. So they paid some of the best sculptors in the world to make their final resting places. And I could show you hundreds and hundreds of these, but I've chosen just a couple, just to show you that prosperity changed the face of the cemetery. They give you a feel for the big families of the city as they go through the decades as well. There's that Tower of Babel there with various different figures, and this incredible Art Deco thing on the left, which I think is just, I love it.
It's beautiful.
But yeah, the next slide is my favorite. This is incredible. Gaspare Campari, the 10th child of a farmer, and that surname might sound familiar. He came from nothing, but his drink, named after him, Campari, is now served in 190 countries and makes about $2 billion a year. So his family tomb is a full rendition of the Last Supper with members of his family around him.
I was wondering, I was like, these aren't the apostles. These are...
they're just his brothers and parents and other. But he was the son of a farmer, and now he's the founder of this incredibly wealthy family. So, he wants to show it, and he's made this thing to say, hey, you're going to remember me.
Yeah.
There's some really illustrious people in this. One of my favorite poets in Sicily, Salvatore Quasimodo, is in there. He'll come back later, but I know we've got much more to get through, but he's really worth a read if you like your literature and poetry. Yeah. So, yes, spaghetti's ready. It does look like that, yeah. The next slide, another part of Italy. Practicality, changing tradition. As we move east, we turn to Venice. Canals, romance through and through. The next slide. Venice was invaded by Napoleon. He conquered, and as he went, he was known for revamping laws. One thing that happened, the French invaders were particularly concerned about the fact that Venetians kept burying their dead in Venice, and it's the same place they got their water and the same place they lived. And the whole thing being below the water level, they said, was incredibly dangerous. People would become very ill. So they passed laws, and they decreed that one of the islands, only one, would be used as a cemetery island away from the main city. They would guard from that. And they chose this island called the Isola di San Michele in 1807. And it's still being used today. If you go there now, it's brilliant. It's really worth seeing. It's one water bus away, and the stop is called Il Cimitero, so it's pretty easy to find. But in true Venetian style, your last journey when you've died is made on a special funeral gondola. It's really quite cool. But then said anyone can visit. You can take the water taxi, take the water bus. If you go to the next,
I was gonna say I went to Venice, but I did not go.
Oh, it's brilliant. It said Venice is only part of it. If you go to the islands around, there's also Burano and Murano. Yeah, Burano is the one where all of the houses are in all these big gaudy primary colours, so it looks like Toy Town. Yeah. It's the one you see on Instagram and stuff. It's great to walk around there. But you'll see poets like Ezra Pound, composer Igor Stravinsky, and apart from the fact it's on its own island, it's actually really similar to a lot of Italian cemeteries you'll find all down the country, and areas of Italian ethnicity in other cemeteries in other countries as well. So if you go to the next slide. Italian cemeteries are full of photographs. These are on the same island. These are modern burials. They're still being buried alongside those earlier burials, and they have that same issue of permanence. So, many are buried for only around a century, but it's really cool to see the faces of those buried. I really like going here and you can see the photographs. A number of cultures do this. I think some Eastern European cultures also have these pictures, and you can see them in other ways. They're really, really cool. I think they're fantastic, and it's quite an Italian thing to do. So you will find this when you see Italians in other countries. So you'll see them in Canada, in America. You'll see the same little portrait. Sometimes it's carved onto porcelain. Sometimes it's a little photograph in a little frame, and it's really cool to see. Now, if we go to the next slide, we can't visit Italy. We can't roam around the country without visiting the Eternal City. So here we go. Yes, so interesting pyramids wasn't only consigned to the 1800s. The ancient world did the same for the tombs, and the pyramid of Cestius, shown here, was probably modeled on Nubian pyramids rather than Egyptian ones. Likely, specifically, the kingdom of Meroe, which was attacked by Rome less than a decade before this was built. Records have been lost to explain exactly why this pyramid was built to commemorate Cestius, but it's believed with the proximity that he served in that campaign, and this was to commemorate that fact. It's one of two pyramids in Rome. The other larger one was the tomb of Romulus, and this was demolished by the 1500s, but it was so large that they thought it had to be for the founder of the city, and it became a popular pilgrimage site, being next to St. Peter's Basilica. And if we go to the next slide, you say, Nell, that the writing is legible. A lot of it was found, later excavations and things like that. So it was covered for quite some time. So they did forget about Cestius for a little while. We'll talk about that in a second. But this tomb of Romulus, it was demolished by the 1500s, but it was so large they thought, wow, it had to be Romulus himself. But there are some Greek accounts that it could be Scipio Africanus, as they said that he had ashes taken from a pyramid in Rome. This may be the pyramid, but they don't know for sure. They don't know who was buried, but they know it must have been some incredibly esteemed member of Roman society and culture. But there's no account to tell you who that person was, and the thing itself is gone completely.
Interesting.
If we go to the next slide. The pyramid of Cestius almost suffered the same fate. In the Middle Ages, they forgot who was inside. As I said about the inscriptions, and they thought, well, if the pyramid of Romulus is so near and it's the only other pyramid, this must be the pyramid of Remus. But when they excavated it, they discovered these inscriptions. They piece it back together. It was sealed up in antiquity, possibly looted just before it was sealed up, or sealed up after it was looted again. And now, though, it is open twice a month for a very short period, for like half a day. So if you can go inside, you can see inside that, but you have to book in advance if you want to. It is possible.
That's cool.
And if we go to the next slide,
I was going to say,
still here, Queenie, this is the section that you're going to enjoy most. This was a little detour because we really want to go somewhere else. In 1887, the poet Thomas Hardy, we mentioned, who possibly made the St. Pancras tree. I love how things connect together in this wonderful web of timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly stuff. He visited Rome, and he went to our next venue, and he was so inspired, he wrote a poem when he was stood next to this pyramid. Who then was Cestius, and what is he to me? This monument did exactly what it was intended, and the great and the good still say this occupant's name millennia after he's gone. It's done exactly what it meant to do. If we go to the next slide. We turn around a little bit, and right next to the pyramid is the non-Catholic cemetery, also called the Protestant cemetery. Non-Catholic for the same reason we said, it's on non-consecrated ground, and it was allowed to be used for anyone who wasn't a Catholic or anyone who'd committed suicide, had certain illnesses. So it gathered together all those that could be buried nowhere else. If we go to the next slide. A great number of people from elsewhere fell in love with Rome. It's incredible. They lived there, they died there, but all of those non-Catholic ones had nowhere to be buried. And so this started. The first to be buried there was actually a Scottish person. They call it the English cemetery because so many British people are in there. But of course, the first person was Scottish, and he probably wouldn't be that keen on being called English. He was a follower of the Jacobite King James. So he's not Catholic, he's not English, but it does contain a lot of British people and a lot of romantic poets. It wasn't actually an official cemetery. People just started burying people near that pyramid because they couldn't be buried in proper cemeteries. So even when there's no chance for an official burial, there's still people making the best of the situation and trying to give their loved ones a significant last resting place. They try to adhere to all the rules that we've mentioned, even if they can't really use the official rules. And they see that significance in being buried next to a magnificent pyramid. Percy Shelley, the author of the poem about Ramses the Great, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." I love it so much. "Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare." The loving bit was just me talking about how great it is. Yes, his final work here, "Nothing of him that doth fade, but doth Sothera sea change into something rich and strange." His last epitaph, a wonderful romantic note of him and his life. If you go to the next slide. Another incredibly famous person, John Keats, we talked about before. "All that was mortal of a young English poet, in the bitterness of his heart, the malicious power of his enemies, desired these words to be engraven on his tombstone. Here lies one whose name was written water." He died at the age of 25. "Happy as England, I could be content," he said in 1817. But then he followed that with, "Yet I do sometimes feel a languishment for skies Italian." But the text is incredibly dark. This idea of someone whose name is written water, it gives you this idea of someone being forgotten very easily, very quickly. But it also kind of has a poetic angle. It's an echo from another poem of Catullus. "Sed mulier cupido quod dicit amanti invento et rapida scribere oportet aqua." What a woman says to a passionate lover should be written in the wind and running water. And Shelley, as we mentioned just before, gave his own tribute in Adonai, the loveliest and the last. "The bloom whose petals nipped before they blew died on the promise of the fruit." If we go to the next slide. He was so popular that his angry final words, that he meant to sort of forget him and just to say, forget this, he hated this, they were made bigger and better by other people. Oscar Wilde said, "Thy name was written water, it shall stand, and tears like mine will keep thy memory green." There's a later memorial here in the same cemetery. "Cates, if thy cherished name be written water, each drop has fallen from some mourner's cheek. A sacred tribute as heroes seek, though oft in vain for dealing deeds of slaughter. Sleep on, not honoured less for epitaphs so meek." This cemetery was just where all of these non-Catholics were buried, and it became a place, as some of these people were often very famous, very notable. They came together here, and they weren't just English. We said there's the American sculptor William Story, who made this incredibly personal and beautiful weeping angel to look over his departed wife. It's a really incredible place to wander and to see these kind of things. It's something that it's completely free, and it's really worth looking at. It's very different from the other Catholic cemeteries that you could walk through and see there as well, and it comes together with some of those rules that we had. So next slide. Going somewhere else. We're going to one of my favorite cities in the world, Vienna, in Austria. It's one of the most beautiful I think you'll ever see. Go to the next slide. Rocketing through. One of the first cities in the world that took advantages of urban planning, all these new developments. They used population projections to predict what Vienna would look like by the end of the 20th century. And they planned their city based around it. And it was incredibly forward thinking, were it not for all those things they couldn't foresee. So Austria-Hungary collapsed in 1918. Whoops, a bit like a sort of warm flan. First World War, Second World War. In 2023, the population is just under 2 million, which is less than half of what they thought it would be by the year 2000. And this comes back as well. The imperial family, of course, if you go to the next slide, had their own crypt. And this is where they could pay their respects separately from the common folk. It's common through Europe. This, if you get to see it, it's incredible. You have to find it on Google Maps or something.
Very
It's a
weird.
tiny little unassuming entrance, yeah, but it
Yeah.
leads to one of the most amazing places you'll ever see. It's a couple of euros to get in. Finished in 1633, expanded 8 times because the Habsburgs were really well known with their understanding of where royal families use armies to dominate Europe. They used marriage. It was expanded in the 1960s. The last burial was in 2011, and inside you'll find 12 emperors, 19 empresses, and a total of 138 royal bodies and 4 heart urns. If you look at the next slide.
I was gonna say that's actually wild because I saw this, I believe, in 2008. Yeah, so I that's weird. That there was a burial after I went. That's actually
he was
wild.
Quite famous. He was notable. He was one of the last Habsburgs. He would have been king or emperor after the last one, and his father died quite early. So he became a member of European Parliament and quite a European federalist, and he was quite instrumental in the fall of the Eastern Bloc and things. He would have picnics by the barrier between Austria and Hungary, and do things to try and unify things. And he never really let go of his lineage, and so he was put there in the same way that he did. His heart was taken out and his body was put in as well, so it's an interesting thing. But they all went quite far, all out, to show this grandeur.
They do.
This is the final statement to the world, like we said, and they went big. You've got these massive metal coffins, really baroque. They're really something to see. This is one of the most powerful families in the world. They wanted to show every single descendant who they were. They wanted to list all their military victories, all their achievements, all this grandeur. This is the resting place of Napoleon's only son until 1940, when they transferred him to France, which was something nice that the Germans did. But this isn't a talk about the relatives of royalty. You should definitely see this, but we'll return to the common folk and go to the next slide. Tying things back in again with moving famous people and other kind of things in the Père Lachaise style. With population projections in hand, all these city leaders knew they were in a bit of a messy situation. They built all these big promenades, huge arches. They planned for this really big city, but they knew there was nowhere to bury the dead of a city this big. So they opened one of the largest cemeteries in the world in 1874, 590 acres, and it had 3 million people buried there today. Obviously a lot less when it opened. They start at 0 usually. I'm not sure if this is a slight on the city of Zurich or a compliment to the cemetery, but there's a really famous Viennese joke that this Central Friedhof cemetery is half the size of Zurich, but twice as much fun. The cemetery was incredibly unpopular at first.
Oh my God.
We've got the same issues we saw in London, the consecration, but also it's the only place you could find a massive bit of land that was outside the city. So it was quite a long way to go to visit your ancestors on Sunday afternoon. So nobody really wanted it. And then we had to do something about it. So if we go to the next slide. Ehrengräber.
Oh, there we go.
Yes. How better to attract people who are no different from the people of today than to use celebrities. Just like Paris, just like maybe now, there's probably going to be a massive clamoring to go and be buried next to Kim Kardashian or Lady Gaga or any of the other ones.
Yeah, there already is. I hate to say it.
Yeah,
there's the disgusting story. Have you heard the story of the guy who's buried above Marilyn Monroe? I don't know if it's true, but from what I've heard is she's in a, they're in coffins, but it's in like a, I don't know what the columbarium or something, like multiple stacked on top of each other in a big building. Apparently the guy who owns the plot above her was buried upside down so that he could stare at her in death. Which is, I've heard that. I don't know if it's true, but it's the most disgusting thing I've ever heard. But like, it's already happened. It's already happened.
Rich people, you know.
Rich people, man. Rich people, like, not worth it. Like, absolutely. Ugh.
Yeah, I mean, I still want a solid gold statue of me that turns to face the sun at all times, but I'm willing to make compromises.
I mean, I hate to say it, I want a pyramid. I'm not going to say
a 1,500-foot tall pyramid, or do you want a brick in a larger pyramid?
No, just a tiny, just a Nubian pyramid, or like
just a sort of city block
the
size.
Egyptologist Amelia Edwards, she got buried with she's a giant ankh on because she has a kind of a big stone slab and there's a giant ankh on it, and I'm like, yeah, I like that. That's nice. But yeah, pyramid would be nice, or an obelisk. Obelisk would be fun.
I think people have told me that they're going to put an anchor on my tomb, on my grave. I think they said that. I wasn't listening too much. It could have been something else. I don't know, but they said they'd write that on my grave. Yes, celebrities. Beethoven, Ludwig van Beethoven, Franz Schubert. They dug them up and they moved them. So they didn't really have much of a say. And these composers obviously were very busy decomposing.
Oh, I need a sound alert.
I know, boom, boom. They built a cenotaph to Mozart too, although his body wasn't moved because he was buried in a mass grave and his remains can't be identified. So they don't know about him.
Didn't know that one.
Although there's a really cool project that I remember working with, which is with the Berlin police and some others, and they took every single account of Mozart throughout his life, of his physical appearance, and they took all of the portraits and they did something called an e-fit. And they do this for people who have been mugged or people who have been attacked or something, and they get the description they give out, and it's usually 96% accurate. And they had so many accounts of this person, they said, right, we can do this, and they created an e-fit of Mozart, and it's incredible to look at. If you Google it, you can still find the picture. It's gone around it. When they publicized it, it was quite a big thing, and he looks real. It looks like you see this kind of wild-eyed genius that's just incredible to see, and it makes you think, if you've seen the movie Amadeus, that portrayal was actually quite good. When you see that maybe they were reading all the accounts of what he looked like and going from that, and they might have got it quite spot on. It was really cool, and I think they should do that more. I don't know of any other projects to do something similar, but seeing the face of something that looks like a photograph of someone from so long ago, you can see the romantic ideal of a portrait, but also you see a bit more realism, you see something more to it. It's really exciting. But so these people were moved, Brahms followed, Salieri, Strauss, Schoenberg, they're all buried there, and this increased that appeal, and people then wanted to be moved there. So if we go to the next slide, this cemetery was forward thinking. It was interdenominational. So that was a bit of a controversy at the time. It had a Muslim section in 1876. Wow. It had a Protestant section in 1904, Europe's first Buddhist section in 2005. And there's even a section, a whole hectare dedicated to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which opened in 2009.
No way.
Yeah. So I'd like to move to the Jewish section, though, opened in 1863. This is an important thing for me personally. Here, I've been to Vienna many times. I've wandered through the cemetery many times. I work there sometimes, I do other stuff, but I've always been drawn to this Jewish cemetery. And since last year, I discovered he married into the family. He's not a blood relative. I had a great uncle who fled the Holocaust, and he moved to Britain from Vienna, and he lost his parents and family. And I know now that they're buried in this cemetery, and that's kind of cool. It's like a nice thing. It makes it really special. But even before I knew this, what you're about to see is really heartbreaking and incredible. And I think if no one points it out to you, you never even notice it. It's really hard to see. And it was recommended to me, and I went because it was recommended. And when I saw it, I really went, wow, okay. So I recommend to all of you as well, if you get to Vienna, you have to see this. Go to the Jewish section. If you go to the next slide. It was desecrated in the Night of the Broken Glass, Kristallnacht of 1938, and it has never been restored. But nature has reclaimed it. So amongst all these broken headstones, sometimes you'll see family members sometimes adding things like body not here, died in Auschwitz, and other extra notes. But nobody's restoring this area. It stands kind of like a memorial in itself to all of those terrible events. And if you move to the next slide again, there are animals there as well. Wow. Pheasants, 5 or 6 deer, there's a little herd. The whole area is now almost turning into a forest more than a cemetery. And it not only goes to hammer home just how big this place is, even now there are massive open fields that are just assumed they would have been full by now. They're still empty, still waiting to be used. There's whole areas that are big enough for whole herds of deer to live without danger. It also brings back that reclamation of, like we mentioned before, about how our body returns to the earth, and perhaps so too does our memorial if we don't keep going. So there's something, I think, quite moving about that. And also it's when these people here are kind of forgotten, I tend to pick up a stone or something to go with me. And it's a Jewish tradition that when you go to a burial or something like that, and do a cemetery, and you go to a grave, you put a stone or something else on the grave, and it's like you've contributed to the burial. You're kind of part of it, and that's your way of paying tribute. If you go to the Budapest synagogue, I think it's the second largest in the world, it might be the third. They have Raoul Wallenberg, who saved many Jewish lives in the Holocaust. And his memorial, because his body was never found, he disappeared. He was taken by the Soviets, and no one knew what happened to him, if and when he died. And then his memorial is covered in stones. All these people who perhaps are descendants of those people who were saved, or people who knew what he'd done, they have to keep moving them away to leave his name. And it's just mountains and mountains of people who've come to pay tribute in that way. So I go there and I put a little stone there, even though I'm not Jewish, just to kind of contribute to that as well. And you can see other people when you go there. There are handfuls of little stones in certain things, and you can tell that someone else has come to pay tribute. So if we move to our final country, slightly north, for another case study now, Kutna Hora, in what we now call Czechia. You probably never heard of this place, and if you have, you're going to know where we're going with this. And
I have a suspicion, but I'm not sure.
Weird. Yeah,
I might be wrong.
It's a town. Yeah, with about 20,000 people. It's unassuming. And after all we've seen, I bet you're thinking, I bet it's got something to do with that big church. No. We're going to go somewhere even more obscure. If we go to the next slide. There's a district of Kutna Hora called Sedlec. Imagine how small we're talking now. So a place of 20,000 people, a district of that. If we think about 4 cores, this example features 3 at once. So let's introduce the faith part. So in 1278, the abbot of the monastery here in Kutna Hora, a man named Henry, went to the Holy Land. And when he returned, he came back with soil from Golgotha, or Calvary, depending on the version of the book you read, the hill that Jesus Christ was crucified on top. So he spread that soil around the cemetery. And from then on, people were, I've done it before, dying to get in. Not as good the second time. But this wasn't a large place. So that brings with it a number of problems. Here's the next slide. This cemetery was enlarged as much as they could. There were many people who perished in the Black Death in the 1300s, the Hussite wars that went through the country in the 1400s, but even so, it still wasn't enough. People still wanted to be buried here and nowhere else. They wanted to be in that holy place because of that connection to Jerusalem and to Jesus. So things started to get a bit awkward. So it's common, we've talked about before, about bodies were exhumed when they decomposed. The timeline got shorter and shorter and shorter. First they rented for generations, then for decades, then just some years. Bones were stacked in the chapel, but even then, with so many people, this became a big issue. So next slide. The bones started to pile up, and the pile started to grow, and something had to be done. And the noble family that ruled the local area, the Schwarzenbergs, saw an opportunity and wanted to go down in history. So they employed a local woodcarver. Note, woodcarver, right? This is important. He's a woodcarver. He's not someone who does this. Ask someone who... say, you'll see why. It's all strange. He's called František Rindt, and he isn't usually noted in any books you care to read, at least until now. And he was given this chance to make his mark. I don't know what it says about him. He did make a mark. He took those bones, all those bones of those piles that were building up, and he made a work of art. So note the red dot again. I may have to do our 1, 2, and 3.
Our 1 and 2 and 3, because I know exactly this is what I was thinking this was. Oh,
we're going to start in the shallow end. He took the bones. He made religious symbols. They were, in his eyes, no longer people, as was in that culture. So it was a perfect way to honor them. But yeah, he did make a few marks. And I said shallow end, so this keeps going. So if we go to the next one.
I'm sorry, those are like arm and leg bones, like a chandelier hanging from the ceiling. That's
more of an archway. The chandelier's to come, but yeah, there's certainly you see the crucifix with the
IHS with the two. See, I love bones, and so like I'm trying to figure out what. So like these are jaw bones.
It's
around
amazing, you know,
presumably
which
what a
I
femur.
don't even know this.
Yeah, so this is a jawbone, femur. This is probably a hand bone somewhere, or a foot. Actually, no, that's definitely a foot bone. These are probably humerus, and then this. What the hell is? This is a piece of a vertebra, but I think they either cut a rib or maybe it's your scapula. It's like and then the
It might be
pelvis bones
humorous,
are up
but he's not
here.
laughing now. I know that. Yeah.
There are 3 pelvis bones. They're mostly using femurs. It's very interesting. I wonder if somebody has taken a very interesting, like, I don't know, like seeing which bones were being used and which bones, because there are not very many finger and toe bones, and I don't see as many ribs at the moment. But this is like wild.
Yes.
Yes.
I see, Freya,
Oh,
you mentioned
my
the
God.
Santuario di San Bernardino al Orsa in Milan. That's one. We mentioned ossuaries a little bit earlier, and we're gonna keep going with this, so you'll see some more. But yeah, there's certainly this idea when the culture thinks there's no soul, they don't really have as much. They don't care about bones in the same way, so they can do this. And this is the thing that to us, in our culture, where we think, wow, these are people, how crazy. They just shrug their shoulders and go, yeah, they're not people anymore. And this is the difference that we can't, it's hard for us in our culture to get our head around. And it seems like something from a horror movie where they just go, oh, that's nice, and then just move on. It is cool. But it's strange and cool. And I totally understand. It is real, Eclipse. It's just bear with us. It's going to get bigger.
It's hard.
So yeah, there's decorative sconces there.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your head around, because I think sometimes your mind convinces you that it's not real. Like I'm very much one of those people that I don't really get, like, I like gore. Like I when I watch it on TV, when I see all those things, like I just convince myself that it's all ketchup, that it's all fake, and it's all not real. And so I think my mind is continuously trying to do this, because I'm just like, you're right, this looks like a movie set. This looks like I'm in the Temple of Doom. And obviously in that culture, they thought the exact same thing. They didn't think of anything to do with the bodies, but it's just wild to imagine. Because honestly, I know a little bit enough about how to identify the sex from a skull. And so I would be going around here and I would be trying to figure out which ones of these are women and children and men. And age. Like these are things that I can figure out quite easily, especially with a skull. Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's it. Yeah, seeing that is interesting. It's said that difference is cool, but it is, like people are saying, it is fascinating. It's really
fascinating.
I think maybe it's the difference, or maybe it's the and thinking these were people. That's it. When you get close to a skull anywhere, and you sort of think for a minute and go, this used to be a person. I could sit next to this person. I could have a talk. That is really weird. And I think your mind tries to like it does with movies and with musicals, where it's like the suspension of disbelief. I think your mind tries to fix it, tries to be like, no, that's not how I recognize what a person is. Like it really tries to change it and stuff. And this is very, very hard to look at, because it's just hard to imagine that anyone would see this other than people. Yeah, and as you were saying, Freya, about the different ossuaries, on the right-hand side is the more traditional kind of arrangement of this kind of packing them in a neat, slightly artistic way. It is a good memento mori thing, but if we go to the next slide, this is where we're going to get even bigger. And this is where you can say, is this real? So this is a bonanza.
Bonanza.
Yes, I'm back on top, baby. I'm here. Yeah. Oh,
wow.
you can see, this is it. The cider is over. I'm onto the beer. Chandeliers. The most macabre chandeliers you'll ever see. Each one is filled with at least one of every single bone in the human body. Totally unique around the world. Obviously more of some bones. But I'm going to go further still. If you go to the next slide.
You can also see all the people down here in the corner of this photo.
It's a tourist thing. A lot of people go.
What?
Yeah.
The writing!
He made sure he went down in history because he signed and dated his work in human bones. If this is new to you, and I can only imagine, I can see these people saying, wow, wow, wow. You're thinking, he can't go any further, can he?
No! No!
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say, these look like that he has cut them in half because of how flat they're sitting against. Although they might be like inset if that's like concrete or something. But yeah, there's a lot of jaw bones. That's a scapula. That's a scapula up here. I have no idea what this really curvy thing is. It must be like an end of a rib or something, because there's not a lot of bones that are. And there's a vertebrae. This is, yeah. Wow.
It's getting serial killery, isn't it? It's getting kind of a
These
bit...
are ribs. The eights are
random
ribs.
carpenter.
This is getting full serial killer. This is funky font.
So
I was gonna say there is absolutely a skeleton font that I have used, but just not. It's just they're all straight bones, like they're all like supposed to be like femurs and stuff, but like this is just insane.
So Eclipse, when you're saying how he found all the skulls, these are all people who wanted to be buried in that cemetery, and then were dug up because they didn't have the space. So these are all people who thought they were being buried in the most holy of places, and they were going to be closer to Jesus and this kind of thing. And then afterwards, they had so many of these left. They did this, and once they finished, they still had about 10,000 bodies left over, and they just put them all in a mass grave and forgot, and just said, "Well, we've used all we need. The rest just go in the ground." And so, that's the difference. I don't know if I'd prefer to be part of a chandelier or going in the ground. I don't know, but yeah, that was what happened. So they didn't use all of them.
I would argue that if you were inside the church, you were probably a little bit closer to Jesus than you were in the graveyard. But
yes,
yeah, no, I think I'd prefer the mass grave.
Yeah.
Oh, I have seen this.
I said it would get worse.
I have seen this.
On the left, this is the coat of arms of the family that funded the whole endeavour. To make sure they were never forgotten, the whole coat of arms was made in human bones. You can probably make out a bit of it. You can see the stripes on the top left. The flaming branch.
These are fingers.
Yeah. The waves on the right, the crown on the above. Even that head on the bottom right, they've used an actual head. With a bird made from other bones. It's just... I think this is the only example of this you'll ever see. Yeah, it is a crow eating an eye. Heraldry is a strange thing that
it's one of the weirdest
master's degree. Yeah,
that's one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. And the branch on fire. That's a very interesting.
It's not as rare as you might think. So my master's degree is paleography, genealogy, and heraldry, and so I studied heraldry quite a lot, and all of this stuff is designed so that you can recreate it without ever having seen the coat of arms. That's what an armorial is. It's just a a description, usually written in French, of what the thing looks like in a lot of detail, so that someone who's never seen it can draw it on the other side when they get sent this, because they didn't have photographs to send. And so this could be, it's called blazoning or blazoning, depending where you are in the world. And you could write this out and it could be recreated. And I don't want to be too geeky, but I feel like I'm going to sit after this and blazon this just to see if I can. But it's that'd be very interesting. It's a bit big. Yeah, it's going to take a while. Usually they're a lot simpler. It's certainly not all like this, but yeah.
My family
there are some weird things.
Is very simple, because I'm pretty sure each of the squares are all matching. I think it's very hard to see from the tiny. Oh, actually, no. I should look at the actual thing I have freaking framed on my freaking wall. Yeah, two of them are they're exact same in the corners. So I forgot that I had that framed on the wall.
It's like party per parley, party per fess, which is like division. Then you have the color or ghoul, etc. But that's another thing. But yeah, this is the only case of this you'll see probably in the world, and I think, to be honest, one is probably enough.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
I am fine with that.
It's cool.
I hate the garland of skulls. That's probably my least favorite, is that garland. It just looks like a garland of skulls at the very top that are like running along.
Decoration. It's cool. It's making it's a Halloweeny. Yeah. I know. So the next place. Those people who close their eyes, I don't have any idea what you've been thinking about this past bit, but we're done with the bone now. For now. Not too far away is another place. Yeah, it feels like if you do find another, tell me. I don't know. I've never known of another, but I'm
well, because I was going to say, I actually thought this was something. I thought this was the Bone Church, which I believe is not in Czechia. I believe it's in Norway or Sweden or something. So that's what I was going with, but it was the same exact concept, just not this particular one. Though I have seen that seal, the herald before.
Yeah, the coats of arms are different, but the idea of using bones, said ossuaries we mentioned, they're usually a bit simpler. But
yes,
certainly the ossuary idea goes on.
Rahab, you missed a very long explanation of the catacombs in Paris. I was at the beginning of the lecture. Definitely rewatch that if you want to learn more.
But not too far away from Kutnahola, we're going to Brno, which I love. It's another place that I visit a lot for work. And this is a really cool place. It's off the beaten path, but it's really cool and worth going. You can get flights there. It's a nice city. It's not too big, but it's really great to get into sort of Czech culture and all kinds of stuff. There's some great stories there. It's an indicator that things can be right under our noses, and we can ignore them or forget them, or we can do something about it. So if we go to the next slide. City of about 380,000 people. It's capital of Moravia in the old times, formerly Austro-Hungarian Empire, Austrian Empire, etc. Subject to all those same laws. Remember we talked about those hygiene laws in the 1780s. Brno is a weird place. Brno has lots of folklore. When I was having food in a pub there, they told me really casually about the dragon that they killed that they have stuffed at the town hall. And I thought my Hungarian must not be good enough. I must have misunderstood what's going on. I said, what do you mean a dragon? Well, a dragon? He's like, yeah, a dragon. So I moved into German. I tried to speak to him in German. I said, there's a dragon. And he said, do you speak German better? And he said, and he spoke in German. He said, yes, a dragon. And he was getting more and more annoyed that I didn't understand and didn't listen. And he said, it's in the town hall. It's just there in the front. And so finished my meal really quickly. Me and my partner were just like, oh, I said, eat up quick. I want to see the dragon. And they're like, what are you talking about? We just said, we're going to see a dragon. And got there. And supposedly this dragon that had been killed in the Middle Ages that had been stuffed. And I got there and I saw it. And I was like, wow. It was a crocodile. There's a stuffed crocodile hanging out on the thing. And I just... It's lovely. I think it's such a cool place. It's full of all this kind of cool stuff.
You're still convinced it was... Are you sure you didn't meet a person from the Middle Ages?
I don't know if they're convinced it's a folklore. I don't know. But it's yeah.
Wow.
I don't know how the one crocodile... I don't know if they've never seen one. I don't know. But yeah, so there's some fun stories around there. It's a cool place to visit. I recommend it. And it's incredibly cheap as well because it's a little bit off the beaten path, so it's worth going. But Brno had this ossuary, just like the other cities we'd seen. And it was in use from the 1600s through to the 30 Years' War. And there was a big siege in Brno that lasted for 112 days. It was supposed to last for a week, but the people of Brno kept holding on. And the final day of the siege had some really interesting folklore around it. The Swedish general that was around the outside of the city was in a pub just outside of the city planning his assault. And he said he would attack the city one last time. And he would take the city before noon. Well, that was it. Forget it. His army were almost getting mutinous. It had been too long. He said, I'm going to do one more attack. And if I don't take the city by noon, we're just going to leave. We're going to say we lost. But unfortunately for him, the person who was serving them the alcohol could understand Swedish. And he told the defenders of the city, the Swedes attacked and they were getting the upper hand. It looked like they were going to win. And the city went, wait a minute. So they rang the bell for noon an hour early, so that they didn't have to, to go through this extra hour and lose. And the Swedish army left. And to this day, at 11 o'clock, they still ring the bell 12 times to kind of commemorate that. So it's a cool little bit of local folklore. Yeah, I'm also employed by the Brno Tourist Board.
I could see what this stream has turned into.
It sounds like it. But anyway, if we go to the next slide.
Nope. Next slide. Go. There we go.
Yeah. I love it. They don't pay me, but yeah, I do like it. The ossuary in Brno was filled with all those people that were killed during the siege, and also people who suffer from all the diseases because of the conditions of the time.
Yeah.
Bubonic plague was quite common there. So much so, they had to keep expanding this ossuary all the way into the 1700s. But then those laws we talked about, the hygiene laws, you can't be buried in a town centre anymore. This ossuary is useless now, full circle. The monks who were overseeing this, they just cut their losses. They bricked up the entrance and said, well, we can't use it. It's done with. And here lies the problem. And some of you might be already ahead of me, bringing some more of what we learned into the mix. Years pass, decades, centuries, and the ossuary was forgotten. It disappeared from the maps. No one really knew where it was. They knew there was one. They'd heard stories, but they didn't know anything else about it. So life carried on as if it never existed. And then comes the hero of our story, an unwilling hero, a bold, intrepid maintenance worker who was digging a hole to restore pavement in the town square. And without warning, the whole floor fell in, and they fell into, you guessed it, the ossuary, or what remains of it. And I'll show you what that looks like. I took a photo. If you note the red dot, because it's going to get weird. And if you want to do the count to 3, yeah, let's call him Dave.
Dave,
or
the
a more Czech name. I don't know.
David. I don't know. I have no Czech accent.
I don't know the most common Czech name.
1, 2, and a 3. Oh my God.
So, yeah, imagine that. Going to work to repair a road and falling into this. Pitch black, 3 feet deep in water, 5 feet deep in human bones. The remains of 50,000 bodies. So it's the second largest ossuary in Europe, second only to Paris, which we've seen. And this happened in 2001. And I don't think that guy has slept since then. No. I think that's just an incredible, that's just outside of the realm of normal experience. Of just, a hole. Get me out, please.
I was gonna say that's the beginning of a good adventure movie. Like literally, the beginning is just a guy just trying to dig a hole. Just trying to dig a hole and
just making holes. Yeah. And so they had a choice in Brno. They could fill the ossuary with liquid concrete. They could give up on it. They could say, well, that's it, we're done. Or they could restore it. And thankfully, they chose the latter. And I was there when they reopened it. It was incredible. Yeah. So if we go to the next slide. They painstakingly sat and rearranged all of those 50,000 people's bones into the original style of walls where you can walk amongst them again. It's an incredible experience. And for all of you Jigsaw fans, you might like a challenge.
Yeah,
it took 11 years. It's so Czech as well. It's so weird.
Wait, so
they did. I don't think they really know what to do with it. So when you go there, there's almost like a Hitchcock style violin stab music that's piped in over the top, which you're thinking, not sure about this. It's very Czech. And one thing that you can see, which we talked earlier about the bones and looking at the skulls and saying these used to be people. This is something I was told when I was there, and I don't know, maybe someone more scientific can tell me if it's true or what it is, because I don't know enough about this to know, that you can tell how these people died by the slight discoloration of the skulls. So those people who have slightly yellow tinted bones died of cholera, and those who have slightly red tinted bones died of the plague. And I found that quite interesting. I could tell slight different tints, but I don't know if that's true or that's just some kind of folklore.
I was, I think it might be folklore based in fact, because bones do get stained, depending on what happens to them. Often I find it's more, from like blood, like a head trauma that might sit like on the skull for a while before they die. I think I've seen like marks, like staining and stuff. But I was gonna say, there is this one right here. This skull is, you guys might not be able to see it on stream, but on my monitor, that is distinctly redder than the rest of them.
Which one are we looking at? Sorry, if you can point out on which picture and what.
The one on the left, for going one row up and then one from the right.
2 across.
Yeah.
This one... So you can see like a slight difference. And I said I noted it in a lot of the different skulls. So yeah, I think they were, when they were cataloging and doing things, I think they may have made some marks. I think some of those are little pencil marks, but yeah, it's
I feel like it might be, but I won't say that like your entire skeleton turns yellow. Like I don't think that's how it works, because often the other stuff is, I mean, these people obviously were buried at some point. Burials can stain skeletons, and as well as getting sun bleached if they were left out in the open as well. So environmental things are probably more likely. Honestly, I would not doubt that a skeleton would get dyed red if they were in very, very iron-rich soil or in an iron coffin. Cemeteries,
all skeletons get dyed, but they dye colors also, you know. So,
yes.
Boom. Yes.
Boom. I was gonna say that I actually just recently was talking with one of the archaeologists I work with about this very strange blue um, mineral that forms on human remains. I cannot remember the name of it for the life of me. But essentially it's a green crystal that can be used like for crystals and stuff, but it appears blue and kind of moldy when it's growing on human remains, and it has to do with iron rich soil that is wet in wet environments. So it's like something you would not find in Egypt or something, but you might find in other places. And we were going on a very deep discussion about it because it literally looks like blue. Oh, Vivianite. Thank you, Freya. How did you know that? That's exactly what it is. It's called Vivianite.
That's the strangest name I've heard.
It is a strange name. I remember thinking that too. Yeah. But yeah, the Vivianite, and it. Oh, that's the other thing we were also talking about. It also is really prominent in people who are buried in iron coffins. So I hate to say it, I think all the Habsburgs might be covered in Vivianite. I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, they are in. Yeah. It's very random side quest conversation, but
yeah.
Very interesting.
It's cool. So if we go to the next slide, we see more of the modern kind of way that they, I think, again, in a Czech way, haven't really decided what to make of this. So there are modern sculptures in here. There are other things. There's eerie, ominous lighting. It's not a place for memorial in the way that we would consider it. I think they've kind of tried to make it something else. Part art gallery, part tourist attraction, part something else. It's a really it's the Elder Scrolls boss.
It does look like
Vivek, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
It's got the same number of polygons as well, but it's not the most calming place, and it's quite a strange thing to think of your own mortality and to think of the way that I said different people have considered death and in human remains and what they've done with it, and it's a strange way to bring it back home to say, well, we have a very specific way of understanding how death happens, what we do with human remains and what goes on, but all these other cultures, and I'm only talking about European cultures here, we could keep going for 6, 8, 12 hours, still bringing in North African, bringing in Asian, South American, Central American, all these things, all their influences, and to say, they all have their own and they all have different combinations of this different thing, and it's interesting to just get out of our little kind of cultural section and see some of this extra stuff. But it is it's jarring and kind of difficult because death and the things around death are kind of they're considered so static to us. I think they're one of the most difficult things to look at how other people do, because you kind of see them as so constant and concrete. The idea of other people doing it differently is hard to understand, and it's acceptably hard to understand. It's not something that people say, oh, you just don't get it or anything. I think it is genuinely difficult to come to terms and to get your head around this idea of me coming in and saying, I've got this great idea for your grandfather. I'm going to make him into a chandelier and we're going to hang him in the kitchen. And I think it's not going to work if you did that in in Salt Lake City or Omaha or anywhere else. They're just going to say, I'm going to call someone. I
was going to say Salt Lake City might be something different because the lovely what is it, dead baptisms that they do. It's a whole other side.
That process is not. It doesn't revolve around the body.
The bodies.
That's an entirely sort of spiritual process. So it's not. They don't do anything with human remains. So it's kind of they. I don't know if it's deliberate, but they definitely stay away from messing around with. It's you may not know where these people are and everything else, and that stems from one passage of the Bible that says, I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't memorize it entirely.
Yeah.
It's, if someone is not there to baptize the dead, who shall baptize them? And that interpretation is when we've got to do it, and
we've got to do it.
That came from that. But
so
if we go to the next slide, we're at that point. We've gone all the way around. We're done with the bones. No more bones at all.
No more bones.
Yep, we've gone all the way around the world. You've never left your chair, or maybe you've moved around the house. I don't know. We've seen different cultures. We could keep going for so much longer. Said we could talk about the Palermitan crypts. We could talk about other places. Every time I keep thinking, I can think of 6 or 7 other cool cemeteries. But all of these cultures have the same kind of motif that death isn't really the end. Whether it's ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, Rome, modern ones, they say there's something else that continues, and that's why the body needs to be respected in some way, or something needs to happen. One of my favorites is that wonderful phrase I really like, that everyone dies 3 times. First, you take your last breath, and then secondly, your body returns to the earth, and then thirdly, your name is spoken for the last time. And that's really kind of big for me, I think. And I'm used to cemeteries for research and for work, but they're also beautiful places, and they're really cool places to visit and to see, and they give you a window into this world that just isn't there anymore. And it tells us about the cultures that we visit. If you go on holiday, you go there, you can go to a cemetery and you can learn about that culture, and you can see all the things that surround you. I know there are relatives that think we're crazy when we go there and that's the first place we go, we make the beeline there, but they really have this massive value, just far beyond just a historian's thing. So, you know, if you want to get under the skin of anywhere, go to a cemetery, and it will definitely make you the afterlife of the party. You see, I'm still going to get them in. One more slide. There we go. The end. Thank you for sticking with me. I know it's been a long time and we've been all over the place, and you know, I can stay around for as long as is needed. I still have a whole other can of beer, so I'm fine. And I hope you explore some cool cemeteries yourself and tell us about it and come back and do all kinds of cool things. Every time I stream, I get derailed by history, and I like to come into Melissa's streams and seeing her get derailed by history, and also the other lectures other people do. They're cool. And I might meet you in a cemetery. But we mentioned one of my favorite poets, Salvatore Quasimodo, and I like to bring things full circle. So I want to give him the last word for this lecture. And one of his poems has the title, Un sepolto in me canta, a burial sings in me. And I like that a lot. And I hope now we'll get together and we sing a little bit of a chorus. So that's that. And yeah, there we go. We've been everywhere.
Thank you so much.
It would collapse. Maybe it would collapse. Yeah.
And into comparison to the Bass Pro Shop pyramid, that is on, if you go to the Wikipedia of the tallest pyramids in the world, it is on that scale. I believe I don't
know this one.
I have to, oh God. We were talking about it briefly earlier, but I believe, I'm actually going to Google it right now, because I believe it is taller than some Egyptian pyramids. Tallest pyramids in the world.
I know the one, what do you call it? The one in Vegas, but I don't.
Yes,
think
the
that
Luxor
counts
pyramid.
building,
Yeah. So the Memphis pyramid is 321 feet tall, which in comparison to the Pyramid of Giza, it's 454 feet tall. And it is called the Bass Pro Shops. It was originally built in, I know way too much about this because I went to school in Memphis, and I've been here several times. It was originally built as a stadium, basketball stadium, and then it went bankrupt, and they turned it into a convention center, and then the store Bass Pro Shops purchased it. Is the largest Bass Pro Shops store in the world. It has a duck museum for duck call and duck models, like fake ducks to tempt other ducks to get shot. It also has a hotel inside that essentially the entire thing is hollow. So, because obviously it needed to be a stadium. So when you go inside the hotel rooms, they actually face the inside and they look like log cabins. And then inside the store, there is a full lake that has boats sitting on the lake, and an enormous fish tank and a tank with crocodiles, and an elevator that goes to the top of the pyramid where there's a restaurant.
This sounds like the description. Yeah, it sounds like my 6-year-old nephew trying to tell me I don't know how much of this is real and what's going on, and it's like, and there was a crocodile, and then there was a fish tank, and then there was a swimming pool, and then it's.
But honestly, this makes a lot of sense, because when I went to this for the first time, I remember thinking, this is enormous. Like, this is really, really big. And when I went to go see the pyramids of Giza this past February, it's weird to say, I didn't think it was as big as I thought it was going to be, because I thought it was going to be astronomically bigger than the Memphis Pyramid. It's proven it is only 100 feet taller, which in comparison to tall things is pretty low.
I've just looked up the height of the Empire State Building, and now I'm quite alarmed that the Empire State Building is 1,250 feet tall. Yeah. So this pyramid originally was going to be like 200 feet taller than the Empire State Building, and I'm thinking pyramids are quite square.
I was going to say
a city large.
The shard for some reason is included on it as a modern pyramidical buildings, and it is 1,016 foot tall. But yeah,
it's a sort of pyramid if you're very vague with your description.
There's also something called the Walter Pyramid in Long Beach, California. Oh, it's an arena. It's an arena, just like the Bass Pro Shop one was. Okay. But yeah, random things about pyramids.
It is nice that Memphis got a pyramid.
Yeah, it's actually right on the water, so you can see it instantly when you fly in. It's like very obvious. And it is technically, the city of Memphis was named by Andrew Jackson after the ancient city of Memphis. So there are quite a few Egyptian things in the city, including the Institute of Egyptian Art and Archaeology, where I got my master's. So it's very weird. Yeah, it's a very strange little city. Because it's also home to Elvis, so Elvis's house is there. It's just a whole other side thing.
Was he born there, or did he just was really attached to
No,
Memphis?
So he was born. Okay, this is a wrong tangent of history. I was born on Elvis's birthday, so I'm obsessed with Elvis. I have been since I was a young child. He was born in Tulupo, Mississippi, which is just about maybe an hour south. But then when he became famous, he built Graceland, which is a very nice house and property. To be honest, it is generally one of the best museums I've ever seen, because like you get to go and see the house, and you get to see like the recording studio and the jungle room and all this stuff. But then they purchased the lot across the street, and essentially Elvis never threw anything away. Like, he's an archaeologist's like best friend and a historian's best friend. And they essentially have these massive buildings that are open storage of all of his things. And so they have all of his cars, they have all of these writings, these letters, all these random pieces he has. And it's one of the best, like, just museum setups I've seen kind of ever. And you can go on his plane.
This is the big question now that people in the chat can ask everything. What is the best museum? What is the coolest museum? There's so many.
There's so many.
This is,
Graceland.
I love.
And don't forget, there's a hotel, and there's also something called Elvis Week every year.
I don't know any museums out of a week.
No, I don't know any as well. Yeah.
I like. I mean, there's the Phallological Museum in Iceland, which is interesting, but probably not for this. But also in Reykjavik, they have the Settlement exhibition, the Settlement Museum, and it's the most Icelandic thing that they know that Iceland was settled in about 871, plus or minus 2 years.
That's great.
Anywhere else would call it circa 871, but it's called 871 plus or minus 2 years. That's the title of it. It's so. They have to be exactly specific. They can't let you just think it's around then. They can't just call it anywhere else in Britain or America. So you just got it's 871, or just call it the Settlement Exhibition either. They have to call it 871 plus or minus 2.
Plus or minus 2.
And
I love that.
Yeah, they built it around the ruins of the original first farmstead. So you go into this covered building with all of these screens that show you what life was like and all the artifacts they found, stuff around, slightly raised. The footprint of that first farm, and you can walk around and see all the stuff and see what life was like and stuff. And I really like it's interactive and cool, and that's always good. And really good how they brought like modern technology in, and you've also got the original stuff there in front of you, so you can see it rather than the places that just leave you with the footprint and nothing else. All the places that are just interactive, and you feel like you're not connected to the actual history. So you're stood in the right place. You're stood on the actual farmstead. And it's really cool. It does a really good job.
Amazing. So, are there any last questions for Dapper? Because I need to eat. And Dapper is in England, so it's even later. And this has been a great, absolutely amazing stream. I'm so glad everyone got to join. Please just drop any quick questions. As the questions are coming in, I'm just gonna thank every single person that just followed as I scroll all the way back. Thank you so much, Inked Pitbull, Spider Queen, 5280 Andy, Frisk Chris, I'm Big Daddy's dad, Hayconda Aquaponics, Rue Q, Socially Confused, 10S, Uncle Boy Juice, Jesus Christ,
I love it. I
Mangazy,
love these names so much.
Space Dive, Zageth, Nerithos, Erg67, Armageddon, Miss Keprikel, Lesbianist, El Kaza, what the heck? The Lonius Monk, Free Schernerbart Ride, Ozassi, Manix the Lemur, Mr. Snipes, Chudley61, Fire Fae, Paleo Lord, Link for Real, Benzor, Eden Gal, Angian Mo, Winter, Owls About This, Spiffness, Cloudy Cone. This is absolutely insane.
So cool.
Kelly in Texas. That one's easy. Gatsby, Hades Flopper, Frankie, Queen, Mound, Orange Boy, Car Gen X, Linnelephant, Nad Captain, Sibley.
See, Thelonious Monk. It's easy when you write it out like that.
Thelonious Monk. Oh, okay. I got you. I got it. Thank you so much, Chris, for subscribing, and thank you for cheering 100 bits. Thank you so much. Spread in Love, MTN 199, Karki Plays, and the latest Kate. Oh my god. Thank you guys so much. Absolutely, genuinely lovely for you guys to pop in. Thelonious Monk. I'm sorry, the zeros were messing me up. I couldn't read over the zeros. Oh, and Shady 901. Thank you so much. We did turn on the alerts again. I had to turn them off. It was so much in one moment.
I like it. Let's blind everyone with
yes.
jokes.
So Baha, this was exclusively going to understand British and European cemeteries. So we didn't really cover any any Eastern burial practices. Briefly mentioning some of them and such, but was mainly focused because that is that's mainly Dapper's specialties is European history, genealogy, and such. Alrighty, any last questions?
Cool. We could talk for 10 hours about all the different ones around the world.
I was gonna say it's very fitting that paleontologizing rated, because when we did this last season on the Beyond the Nile guest lecture series, we talked for 5 hours and we had literally no plans, and I was so hungry because I'm on the East Coast, he's on the West Coast. I was like, I need food now, because we started, I think, at my normal time. I think I ate like a quesadilla at like 10 o'clock. I was so hungry. So it's very fitting that another really long stream gets rated by paleontologizing.
It's good.
But yes,
I've got
these
so much beer left. I'm just happy to keep going.
Oh yes.
It's good.
Yeah, so I was reading back in the chat when Dapper was talking about the Bone Church, that I guess you guys were talking about the difference between archaeology and paleontology, which was one of the main topics that we talked about when we did the guest lecture with paleontologizing, but we should get him on because there's plenty of things to talk about, the differences between the two, because we still get confused all the time. Every single time the little kid says a fossil, I'm like, nope, so close, not anything.
Friend at Arms has a question.
Yeah, so the other thing is this will eventually be on my YouTube. I'm very bad at putting them on, but they will eventually be on YouTube, the guest lectures, and then any of my personal lectures will eventually go on my Patreon. I was wondering, I was like, it was interesting he was talking about archaeology, but I was like, isn't he out in the field? Like, paleontologizing, if you haven't interacted with him, Dapper is out in the
I remember, you rated him a while ago. I remember sticking around. It was good. I asked him what his favorite dinosaur was and why it was a Stegosaurus. And I started a fight. I don't know. I mean, it is a Stegosaurus. It has to be. Yeah. That's like Triceratops possibly, but
I like Triceratops. But yeah, so but he's out in the field, so he's actually streaming from the field, which is pretty cool. Out in the middle of Wyoming. Okay, Friend at Arms. So all the Bone Zone style Australian churches I'm familiar with are 1500 and 1900s. Are there any from earlier periods that you know of?
Not really, because they didn't really have the same problem. So when they're looking for space, at this point, they didn't need the space because, urbanization hadn't really happened. There were villages with big areas and you could just bury people and it wasn't an issue. So I don't think it really came up until we got to these places where you had city walls and people who were in this area, and that's when this question came up. So I don't know of any pre-1500, and even I don't know of any really pre kind of 1700 and things like that. Really, there's not really too much, and it is down to that growing of cities. And
that is definitely funny though, that I think, I'm sure probably people think that it was more of a, probably similar to the what's it called that we were talking about, the relics but not relics kind of thing, that it's more of an art form, it's more of a way of respecting the dead, but it's literally we don't got the space for them. So I think that's, people don't think sometimes of the practicality that you're talking about. That is interesting.
I think that's it. It's a difficult question to ask about what do we do with these people, and often a lot of people, as we mentioned a couple of cemeteries that were just built over and forgotten, and that's something that happens a lot more, that particularly in places like London or big cities where after a generation or two people just forget that they exist, and they
I was wondering if you were going to talk about Richard III. I was wondering if that was going to come up to this.
So I worked on that, and that was in my DNA thing. So Richard III, oh, here we go.
I know.
It was an incredible project because it fell apart so many times. So the thing about Richard III, so the first thing they tried to do is they started to work on Y DNA, which is your paternal DNA. So that's your father.
Yep.
A woman can't get in at all, because then it breaks the chain and it's a different Y DNA. So you can't use it. And that's the thing. So loads of people came out of the woodwork when they found the body and they were trying to trace back and said, oh, I'm related to Richard III. And it's like, well, yeah, but you have to have this unbroken male line. And there'd be a woman in there.
It's hard. It's especially that far back. It's very
really
hard.
Difficult. Yeah. So what happened was, I remember the guy who was running this whole thing came to me in my office and he pulled out this huge family tree and he said, I need help. And they uncovered basically 6 people who had an unbroken male line going all the way down. They tried to test them. And so what they did was they pulled in 5 of these people and they tested them. And one of the 5 had a different Y DNA to the other 4, which means there was some kind of false paternity. And he was within 4 generations of the other one. So at some point, back to that person's great-great-grandfather, the person they thought was the great-great-grandfather wasn't. And that's one of the problems with using Y DNA, that sometimes, you don't have to be...
daddy.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. It's harder to tell. Whereas when you're talking about maternal DNA, it's really hard to swap that, because the baby, the mother's there when they're born. Father doesn't have to be. So you get that. But the other 4 were the same, but they had a different Y DNA to Richard. So they said, okay, what's going on here? We don't know where this is. It could be in their line. It could even be in Richard's line, and it could mean that actually Richard is illegitimate, and we don't know. But
I've heard that theory.
And they think the rate of this happening is, and this is the sort of jarring thing, is between like 1% and 2% per generation. So it's a lot more common than you might think. People think they have a certain father, and actually they don't, because it's different, and it depends. The culture to culture, it changes. But then the other kind of DNA, which is a DNA that actually lasts a lot longer in human remains, is maternal DNA, the mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA. And that's a lot harder to get wrong than paternity, as we said, and there's fewer haplogroups, so it can go much deeper. And so they turned to that, and they worked out 2 lines of people that had just mother. It goes a father, a mother, and their children all have the same maternal DNA. So I have my mother's maternal DNA, but I can't pass it on. If I had a child with someone, it would have their maternal DNA. That's the same. The same thing with, like, women don't have the paternal DNA, the Y DNA. I can't have it. If we had a baby right now, it would be your maternal, my paternal. That's how it would work. If it was a boy, or it would be just your maternal if it was a girl. And there's another kind of DNA called autosomal, which is the half mum, half dad thing that everyone remembers. But that's a totally different thing. So they found 2 relatives on the maternal line all the way back through his sister. So they traced back from his sister, and they went mother, daughter, daughter, all this way back, all the way down to the modern day. And they found these two people. They triangulated them, they tested it, they confirmed they were right. And there was a mutation in the DNA. And that mutation was the thing that did it. The DNA mutation that happened was really, really rare, and it gave a chance of 1 in 10,000 that this was wrong. So that was the thing they used to prove it. So that genetic kinship, they did the carbon dating, they know the body was from the right sort of era, that he had injuries consistent with the accounts of the battle, they know all this sort of stuff. So they had all that, and so they were pretty, they sort of said it was a likely candidate, but they couldn't say it was him until they'd found that test. And autosomal DNA is the easiest and best way to prove someone's related, but because it goes 50% roughly, so if we're siblings, we probably share about 25%, 50% DNA, this kind of thing, different levels. Use 50% with your parent, I think 25 with your sibling. I may be slightly wrong on those. And it goes back, you have 25% of your grandparent, roughly, but it's not an even slice. It's like a cake. So you get different slices, like slice 1 to 40, 20 to 1, 72 to 91, all this stuff. So you don't get the exact slice. So that's why you might look more like one grandparent than another and things like that. You might get more of one grandparent.
When you do those DNA tests, if you and your siblings do it, you might get slight percentage differences as well.
Exactly. You're getting different elements of your parents. It's always best when you do those tests to test the oldest generation you can, because they're going to be closer back, and that's, better. When I look at my results, I've got 27% of my grandmother, 23% of my grandfather in the same way. It's the same. That's how it happens. And you think, again, when you go back to their parents in the same cut, you might get 10% of one great grandparent, nothing of another, or some, just down to the chance of it. So it's roughly, you're supposed to get roughly 12 and a half, but the more you go back, the smaller these little segments become, and they get to the point where they're just background noise. So you can usually go back about 250 to 300 years, and then it's just gone. And that's the thing. So trying to connect someone this far back, not only does this really kind of DNA decay a lot faster, and it's probably not there, also at this level, it's just impossible to be able to tell unless you have other people from that era to compare against. And that's the thing you just don't have. So the only DNA they could use is mitochondrial DNA, and that's a lot deeper. So if you were to test your mitochondrial DNA now, it will tell you where your ancestors were 5,000 years ago, which is interesting, but it's not something you can use to find out who your second cousin is. And that's why there's different uses. Different kinds.
When I worked as a genealogist, we only accepted some DNA evidence, and the only one that we did was Y-DNA. And it was a very, very complicated process, and we really tried to avoid people submitting the DNA just because it was really, really hard to prove, because we were looking at early Americans, and so it was quite hard.
People don't understand, and that's one of the problems when we talk about these unbroken lines, and there's like almost, it's fine, and when we talk about this in a scientific term, it has to be 100%. There's no almost. You can't say, well, there's 23 generations are fine, but there's one that's not, and well, then it doesn't count. It has to be 100%, and that's really difficult for a lot of people to get their head around. So there's a lot of false submissions, and unless you can prove the submission, it then starts to go all over. And it's lovely, Nerthos, that you recognised me from that. History Hit was good fun. It was good with Dan Snow, and I think we did his family history one time, and then we talked about the 1921 census. No, we did something else. I can't remember what it was, but it was good fun. I need to remember, but
Alrighty.
Been everywhere, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's great. Your bio is very extensive, which I love. It's just you might be maybe the most famous person we've had on this stream.
Our flattery gets you everywhere. It's not. Yeah, I don't know.
I love it.
Alrighty, anyone? Cool.
Yeah. Any last questions for Myko? Because we got this is one of the best lectures we've ever had. This is amazing. I love cemeteries. It's very strange because like I am kind of spooked about cemeteries, but I did a project where That's a very Nathos. That's the question we're going to end with. That's a very good question. Um,
Wow.
so start thinking about it. I did 2 or 3 years ago. I noticed like the Maryland Historical Trust, which is the state next to me, offered a cemetery cleaning 2-day little thing, and I was like, hey, you know what? I'm kind of new into the more historical. Like, obviously, I'm an Egyptologist, but I'm learning more about stuff like this, and so I thought, hey, it's free. I might as well go. And so the I really wanted I went, and we learned about how to clean tombstones, how to do things like that. And then the second day we actually went to a garden cemetery, which I had never really seen before. Like, I knew that there were ones in like in Europe and stuff, but this one was beautifully curated, had beautiful plants everywhere and all these things. And we talked about like the differences, and like that this cemetery is a place for people to hang out and stuff. And it was very interesting to learn that. And so it's nice to see that there are other garden cemeteries that I just like didn't notice or think about and stuff.
Yeah.
All right, Dapper, how do you want to be buried?
So we talked about the what stout is that? It's not a stout. It's Dr. Pepper flavor beer, which I was really excited when I saw it in the store, but
like you gotta take
it doesn't taste that much like Dr. Pepper. It just tastes like cherries. It's still nice. Yeah. Anyway, back to the other thing. We talked a little bit earlier about the transportation of notable soldiers and leaders and stuff back home to be buried in brandy to preserve them and things like that. And that sounds pretty cool. But maybe it should be Iron Brew. They do an Iron Brew flavored beer. I can send you the link. It's so good. That's I'm not selling anything. I don't. It feels like I work for the tourist board.
I know, man.
I'm sorry, but yeah, the Iron Brew one is really good. Anyway, so my story. So I was raised by my grandparents, a Scottish man and a Sicilian woman, and they were married for 73 years. And my grandfather went into hospital earlier this year on his 73rd wedding anniversary, and he died there. And I had my last call with him, and I did this sort of thing and stuff, and it made me think about mortality and death in a way I never had to do before, because I didn't really have any close relatives that had died or anything like that. And he was cremated, and I have his ashes. They arrived sort of a week ago, and they're in my kitchen right now. I put him, and it's strange that they're ashes, and I know different people have different things, but I've put him facing the window so he can look out over Edinburgh and things, and I feel like it's a nice thing, even though of course he can't, but I feel a little nicer that way, and I do go in and say things to him. And again, I know maybe it's an emotional thing and stuff like that. And I think when he first arrived, I sat for a good kind of hour and just held the container and just talked to him. And I think it was a very big moment for me, because I didn't really have that time to grieve. I was too busy working and to everything else, and it was a moment that all came together. And I think I've arranged, because he was a guard at Edinburgh Castle, to have his ashes scattered at Edinburgh Castle. Wow. And to have some of the people who, because he was a soldier there, and he met his wife as a soldier in North Africa and Libya, and that's where my mother was born, and where everything else and things. So the story goes through that, and so I'm arranging for some old soldiers to come and salute him. And when he had his 70th wedding anniversary, I went a bit crazy and asked every country in the world to send them gifts, because I just wanted to see what would happen. So I just learned how to make web scripts of like email things. So I sent like 700 emails by clicking one button, and I was like, I'm going to try this. And for like a week, all these different countries were sending random stuff. They got cards from the president of Malta, the prime minister of the Faroe Islands sent flowers, the Joe Biden sent this little card. All this stuff.
No way!
Just ask. Yeah, it's nice. It's amazing.
It's amazing.
I've learned that dictatorships send amazing gifts. So Myanmar sent this jade necklace in a silk bag with, goodness, with beads all over, a little beaded peacock on the front. And Azerbaijan sent like a yurt mat and this kind of thing, and all this stuff, incredible stuff I got and things. And
seems to be a whole lecture. Really... Are you kidding me? This is
insane.
It's
cool. I'm gonna, maybe I'll bring them all. I can keep going and going. There's so many things.
Yeah.
I got annoyed that Denmark sent a flag, and they said, "Oh, when it's a big day, we just get the flag out, and it's this little flag." And I thought this must be a cop out. When I was in Denmark, I spoke to the head of the National Archives in Denmark. I said, "Is that what you really do, or is this a trick?" And he said, "Oh, we do. We get flags out." So fine, okay, but still, you could have spent a bit more money.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not doing Azerbaijan money, are you? You're not doing Myanmar. It's not the same. But anyway, I've gone on a tangent again. The one thing he really wanted for his 70th anniversary was the old regiment were going to send a piper, and they were going to pipe for him outside. But because it was COVID and everything, it never came.
Oh.
And so I'm trying to arrange for a piper to be there for when Scatter the Ashes, so he'll finally get the piping from his regiment and everything will be nice.
Amazing.
Great. And I still need to arrange the date, and I need to try and work out how to do it, and it's going to be a big emotional time and stuff. But I've learned that I think the place that you are is more important than the how. And I think connecting to somewhere and being there in whatever form, whether it's ashes or a burial. I think I'm kind of keener on a burial, but I don't think there's that much in it, really. I think it's down to your personal preference or your religion or something like that. But I think where you are, where your places go, is the most important. I'm a little saddened that I think ashes don't get you that lasting memorial that people go back and look at, but then you also don't have that reclamation of nature and things that kind of is a bit sad and things. So I think that everyone dying 3 times thing we talked about, first when you take your last breath, secondly when your body returns to the earth, and third when your name's spoken to last time. I just want to try and make sure everyone says my name for ages and then I live forever, and that's cool. But I think my remains, as long as there's somewhere that I love or I have a great identity to and I feel passionately about, I think I'd be happy. And wherever I am, whatever you believe or anything else, whether my grandfather's looking down and bragging that he's going to be at the castle or if he's nowhere, it's a nice thing for the people that are still here to feel like they've done something for that person. And so all the people that I leave behind, I hope they go, well, it's what he would have wanted, and they'll feel like the story's complete. And I think that's what I would go for. So
absolutely,
with not so good history, ashes mixed into a paint. See if you like it. That's the important thing. And he said it's that spiritual experience or the journey for both you and for the people that you left behind. So not so much history, maybe looking to the future. But
I've always wanted to be in multiple places at once. Which is kind of weird.
Like the Plantagenets. Let's send your heart to one place.
It's something that I like it's kind of the thing is I didn't really want to be cremated, but that was mostly after I watched that Doctor Who episode that kind of messed me up in the head. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there is an episode where it's all the people who've been cremated are all shouting and lost and I don't know, something weird. And so I don't know. It's one of it's in one of the modern episodes. I don't really remember it. But the thing about it is I always so my family has a crypt in Hungary, and I always wanted to bring my grandparents there to be buried in the crypt. And now that they have passed on, it's not going to happen because they're buried here in Virginia. But I'm kind of hey, why don't I just skip 2 generations? I'll be buried at the crypt. It's not even it's called a crypt. It looks like a normal tombstone, and I think you just take it off and there's just little sections for all the family members and stuff. But then I've always thought about the body farm, and so I've always been well, why don't you just chop off my head, cremate that, send it over to the thing, and then you can do an experiment of what happens when a head has been decapitated in the body farm. And so that's something that I've always contemplated. But I have absolutely no idea in real life how I would want it, because I feel like I kind of don't care, but I do kind of want a mini pyramid on my tombstone. I kind of want an obelisk or something.
Your dedication to science and research is admirable, but I feel it's this is the last time. You've got one chance. It's just about
you. Yeah. I correct myself. I want to be mummified at the body farm.
You could be mummified.
I could get mummified.
If you marry or if you anything like that, you could be mummified so that your partner will never get another, because you're on the sofa and just there forever. That would be quite good. I'd like that.
No, I think. Well, so one of the
mummified.
things is that this is sort of one of the things I was thinking of, like the expectation of not seeing them as real bodies. Is the Egyptians, they didn't like leave the mummies like in the house, but like at the very, very tail end of Egyptian history, when you have the beautiful Fayum mummy portraits, which are kind of these flat portraits of presumably the people, there's actually a theory that those portraits were hung in the house, like they for a little bit, and then eventually added to the mummy to be buried. And so it's kind of the same thing. It's like you're looking at the portrait, but you're like, that's the mummy, like that's like the mummy and stuff. But yeah, that is true. If I do want a pyramid, I probably should start building it now, which is, I don't have enough money to do that. So
Jeremy Bentham, that's right, the utilitarian, the philosopher. He's kind of mummified and available to hang out with.
At UCL, yeah, I studied abroad there for a semester, and I remember him. Yeah, it's really gross.
He used to hang out.
I don't really like him. He's in like the weird. He's like the weird back corner of one of the buildings. It's not that fun to just randomly encounter him and then find out that it's him.
He just hangs out, you know. He's not always in the same place. They move him. He's
yeah.
The Burke and Hare body snatchers in Edinburgh that used to take their bodies and use them for medical science, and they ran out of the ones they could steal from the ground that were fresh, so they started killing people, and then they were caught. One of those is in the Edinburgh Surgeons Museum, and that's again a strange place to be, but there are some places that are you'll find whether it's a death mask or a genuine body, which I think perhaps if you want to bring a ghost into the fray, these are the ways to do it.
Yeah. Alrighty, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Dapper, for absolutely great, absolutely amazing lecture, amazing stuff. Everyone, I don't think I can give Dapper another shout out because it told me I had to wait 23 minutes, which is ridiculous.
Really?
Let me see if I can do this one at least so that everyone can get the link. Go and follow Dapper. He plays games and talks stuff on Twitch as well.
I just go on history tangents. That's mostly it. I think you can. Yeah,
history tangents, which is not so much different than what we do here.
Yeah, I think tomorrow now I'm going to have to stream. I'm going to have to get back into it, and we're probably going to play Time Guesser all night. That's what we're going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. But thank you so much for coming and onto the stream, and I cannot wait for you to come back next season and talk about something else, because I know you have a whole chock full of lectures already up. So thank you so much. Everyone, say goodbye to Dapper, and we will wrap up the rest of the stream.
See you soon. See you later.
Yes, bye.